All right. Well, home stretch. Now we're going to look at two very important instances of papal blasphemy, and they are Vicarius Filii Dei and Dominum Deum Nostrum Papam. This is the Vicarius Filii Dei title is a title that Catholics deny that the papacy used, but today we're going to prove otherwise, that it was used for over 800 years at least. The name Vicar or Vicarius Filii Dei means Vicar of the Son of God in English, or basically in place of the Son of God. A vicar is somebody who takes the place of the Son of God. And of course, that is the thing that the Bible warns you of, which of course is the antichrist power on the earth. The name also, Vicarius Filii Dei in Latin, also adds up to 666 in Roman numerals. And so a lot of people have connected this to the prophetic fulfillment of taking the number of his name, basically, and having the names of blasphemy on his forehead and things like that, that the book of Revelation warns you about. Now, a quick note on this, though, that's very important. I don't use numerology in what I do. I don't use that as a basis for proving the Bible is true or, looking at the numerological significance of things. I don't think we need to be doing that. I really don't. I don't think that John's revelation of 666 is calling on you to add people's numbers, the numbers of people's names up, and do gematria and all this stuff, because John was a Jew and that would be considered mysticism. I don't think that that's what the Bible is having us do, because it's very easy to add people's names up and add up to 666. You can actually type on your phone, mom, M-O-M, and you will type 666. So when it comes to numerology and number patterns, I talk about this in my KJV only PSYOP series. There's a whole chapter there on numerology and why this whole KJV numerology stuff is nonsense. But the basic idea is that you shouldn't be relying on numerological situations and numerological formulas as primary evidence for why something is true. The Bible itself has constant validation from archaeology and from history that prove that it is true. The Bible has cross-referencing that proves that some supernatural power composed the Bible and not 40 plus authors over 1,500 years, which would have been impossible to have the level of cross-referencing and consistency that you see in the text. It's not possible. Prophecy proves the Bible, and we can look at, for example, Daniel's 70 weeks. That is measurable. It is measurable with archaeology, and there's great archaeologists out there. Not Ron Wyatt, but plenty, like Expedition Bible on YouTube. He does a great job. Patterns of Evidence. He has tons of various series on different archaeological things. A lot of great archaeology that proves the Bible, folks. There has yet to be an archaeological discovery that disproves the Bible. So the Bible has many reasons why it's true. History, prophecy, consistency within itself, and so on. The truth claims itself. The claims that it has are unique because it is honest with the human condition. It is honest with the problem of evil. And it is also honest with the sovereign God. No other path, no other religion addresses these issues like the Bible does. And of course, no other path has the same solution. There's only one solution. There's only one way. If you acknowledge that God is sovereign, he's the judge of the earth, and he must have justice, then you need to pay. Or somebody needs to pay for you, but that person has to have special qualities. He has to be God, so his payment is infinite and affords you living forever. And he has to be man as well, so that he can be representing yourself and your sins on the payment on the cross. And there's only one person who fulfilled that, and that's Jesus Christ. So the Bible has many reasons why it's true. Numerology should not be anywhere near your source for primary evidence, especially when you're dealing with people who are Catholic or Orthodox. If you're dealing with Catholics and you say, see, Vicarius Filii Dei adds up to 666, that proves that this is the beast. That is a weak argument. It really is. That is not what I would lead with. It's interesting, and that's why I want us to look at it, and more so from the fact, because there are other reasons why this is relevant, not just the fact that Vicarius Filii Dei adds up to 666. That's, to me, just an interesting thing on top of everything else. The real reason we're looking at this is because it's documented. Catholics say that this title was never used, but it was used. And it's basically literally antichrist. Vicarius Filii Dei means the vicar of the Son of God, the person who takes the place of Son of God on earth. and that is antichrist. That's why it's meaningful, not so much of the numerological things. However, those things can be interesting. Just remember that they are low-hanging fruit, and do not get swept up in numerological proofs, in numerological codes and whatever else, because not only does language itself as a phenomenon seem to have numerological patterns. It does. I think that is an inherent, we talk about this in the KJV only video. There seems to be just an inherent mathematical nature to language. There are people who have found, quote unquote, predictions of countless assassinations written in Moby Dick using the same principles that people who use like the Bible code and all these things, if you've heard about them, where they look diagonally or up and down or side to side. They've done the same thing and found countless assassination predictions with relatively interesting detail to them in Moby Dick, which is really interesting. It's really interesting that language has this property that if you arrange it in a certain way, there's a mathematical, nature to it. Because again, God designed language, right? So God is infinitely intelligent, and there's harmony and beauty and everything else. So the point is, don't get too swept up in these things, okay? These things are just, the numerological part of this that I'm about to present to you is just the cherry on the sundae. It's just something interesting, and it only adds to the condemnation that we've already built in this situation. So without further ado, this is, like I said, for these particular presentations, the Vicarius Filii and DOMINUM DEUM NOSTRUM PAPAM, we're going to defer to Bible Light Info, because he documents this really, really well, by Michael Scheifler. Again, I don't condone everything that he has, but on matters of the papacy and everything else, he does, I think, a pretty solid job. So, Vicarius Filii, 666, the number of the beast. It might be argued by some that 666 must be applied to one man's name, and this will then help identify him as the Antichrist. I would offer the following verse to show that 666 need not apply solely to a man's name. Revelation 19, verse 16. And he hath on his vesture and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The same Greek word translated as name, onoma, that appears in Revelation 13, 17 through 18, is also found in chapter 19, verse 16. So clearly the word can also apply to a title, and not just one man's name. Now we are told that it takes a certain understanding and wisdom to discern just how this number is actually applied. Based on the fact that 666 can apply to a title, below are several words and phrases that have been put forth over the centuries as probable solutions to the enigma of 666. Now just a quick pause. The Adventists are not the only people talking about this. You'll see as we document this that people have slowly realized the connection between 666 and Rome for many centuries. Now, we're looking at Greek. The numeric equivalents of Greek letters can also be found in the Encyclopedia Britannica under Languages of the World, Table 8. The ancient Greek word for the Latin-speaking man, Latinos, adds up to 666 if you do the gematria on it. Note, Latin is the official language of the Roman Catholic Church. Church documents are usually published first in Latin and then translated from the Latin into other languages. The association of Latinos with 666 was first suggested by Irenaeus in the 2nd century, who proposed in his Against Heresies that it might be the name of the fourth kingdom in Daniel 7, verse 7. Now, this is the quote from Against Heresies. Then also Latinos has the number 666, and it is a very probable solution, this being the name of the last kingdom of the four seen by Daniel, for the Latins are they who are at present bear rule. I will not, however, make any boast over this coincidence. So Irenaeus was very careful with his writings. He recognized that Rome was the fourth beast, but of course this was a long time ago. This was almost 2,000 years ago. But he wasn't going to boast of this coincidence because he's under the Roman Empire. So this is a very interesting point. Now, these are a couple of words. It's a table of different words in Greek. He Latin Basileia, the Latin kingdom, and that adds up to 666. The ancient Greek for Italian church is Italica Ecclesia, and that adds up to 666. In ancient Greek, the word apostates, and that adds up to 666. The word for tradition, paradosis, is 666. If you add up in the Greek alphanumerical table, all of these add up to 666. Now let's look at Latin. Latin has, basically, if you don't know, the different Roman numerals that add up to various numbers and letters, or various quantities. And if we take Vicarius Filii Dei, this one's pretty common. Some people have probably already seen this, which is Vicarius. The U turns into a V, which is 5, because U and V are, synonymous as far as how they're written in Latin. Some of these don't have a value, like F and E, so they're not counted. They're counted as 0. And if you add these up, it basically adds up to 666. Dux Cleri, captain of the clergy, adds up to 666. Ludovicos, vicar of the court, 666. If we look in Hebrew, same thing. You have Romith, which is the Roman kingdom. Now, again, this is using Masoretic, Masoretic numbers. So there's that. Remember that original Hebrew Paleo script that Moses wrote in did not have these equivalents where letters were numbers. So just keep that in mind. But nevertheless, Romith, Roman kingdom, 666. Romiti, the Roman man, 666. Note, Latinos are cited as possible solutions by Latinos, Ecclesia Italica, and Romith are cited as possible solutions by Johannes Gerhard in the 1600s as a Lutheran and his Annotationes in Apocalypsen, page 110. So this is 200 years before the Adventists came around. Romith, Vicarius Filii Dei, Dux Cleri, Ordinarius Ovilis Christi Pastor, and Dic Lux are cited by rector of Berlin, Andreas Hellwig, in 1572 to 1643 in his Antichristus Romanus, yada yada, some long title there, in 1612. Dux Cleri is cited by Walter Brute, a 14th century follower of Wycliffe, in his Registrum, page 356. Ludovicos was proposed by James Bicheno in 1831, a British minister and author applying it at the time to the French King Louis XIV as the two-horned beast from the earth. He Latine, Basilea, and Latinos are cited by Alexander Campbell in his, he's the founder of the Disciples of Christ, in a debate on the Roman Catholic religion in 1837. So the point is that a lot of people were looking at the Roman power as fulfillment of these warnings in various ways for many centuries. This relationship of 666 in Greek, Latin, and Hebrew is only one relatively small yet important indicator that the papacy is the antichrist and the beast from the sea of Revelation 13. This association by itself proves little, as 666 can fit in another people can fit. Sorry, I got distracted. I thought it was my recording. My goodness. Where we are. This association by itself proves little, I agree, as 666 can fit other peoples using the same methods. All the other biblical characteristics of the Antichrist must be considered and met as well. Then this association becomes more significant. Agreed. An objection has been raised that the method of the gematria used above to calculate the Roman numeral value of phrases is incorrect. The word vicarius, is argued, must be calculated with the letter groups as follows. VI equals 6, C equals 100, A equals 0, R equals 0, IU together equals 4, and S equals 0, for a value of only 110 instead of 112. This is patently incorrect. The value of each individual letter is to be added to yield a total value. It is totally irrelevant to the calculation if adjacent letters can be combined in groups to give a value. This assertion that letters must be grouped is nothing more than sheer nonsense. It's true. When you're doing these types of things, you have to just add the letters one by one. 666 and Nero. Some will suggest that the book of Revelation was written only for those living in that time, and that 666 most probably applies to Caesar Nero, who ruled from 54 to 68 AD, rather than someone from the latter centuries. This point of view, which suggests Revelation had an immediate application to the first century, rather than being prophetic, is known as preterism, and is commonly held by the Catholic Church. So just how is Nero linked to 666? The preterist takes a relatively uncommon form of Nero's name, Nero Caesar or Caesar Nero, and adds an N, resulting in Neron Caesar. Next, the Latin is translated into Aramaic, resulting in NRWNAQSR, Nurun Qusar, whatever, which when using the numeric equivalent of the letters, then adds up to 666 as follows. This is again why you can make anything, twisted to Bible prophecy. That's why it has to match all of the other qualities, and then this number becomes significant, or more significant. Remember, still not primary evidence, but it's also interesting if it confirms everything else. An example of this spelling has apparently been recently discovered in one of the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you use the same process but without the added N, the result is 616. Interestingly, some manuscripts have 616 rather than 666, but even scholars such as Irenaeus attribute the 616 to only a copyist error. That's in his Against Heresies, book 5. Quote, this number, 666, being found in all of the most approved and ancient copies of the Apocalypse, and asserts that men who saw John face to face bearing their testimony to it, 666. So Irenaeus says that the 616 is a copyist error, and it should be 666. There is a problem, though, with the above calculation. According to the rules of Jewish numerology known as gematria, when the letter nun appears a second time in a word, it is known as a final and takes the value of 700. So to be precise, NRWNQSR actually adds up to 1,316, not 666. And this is cited from Behind Numerology by Shirley Blackwell. So the preterist calculation, which attributes 666 to Nero, however, it is nothing more than rather desperate attempt to find some likely candidate for the Antichrist other than the papacy. Yeah, that's true. We know that the Jesuits developed preterism. Nobody was a preterist, folks. That preterism, futurism has some ground in history, but preterism, nobody was a preterist up until the Jesuits came around. Nobody believed that the book of Revelation had to deal with the past and the Jews in Jerusalem. The Jews had been cast off. The church is now the center of Bible prophecy. This is having to do with the church because we're in the church age. Nobody for 1,500 years believed mainstream preterism that, this was just, having to do with the past. Otherwise, they would have never included Revelation as part of the canon. Obviously, if people included it, they believed it was still relevant. So that tells you everything. The word anti. Look up in Strong's Concordance word 473 in the Greek dictionary. You will find the word anti is often used to denote substitution. An example of how anti is used this way can be found in the words type and antitype, which are used with respect to Bible prophecy. The type is the pattern or symbol, and the antitype is the fulfillment. The Jewish Passover was a type, and the crucifixion of Jesus is the antitype, or the fulfillment of the example of the type. You substitute the antitype into the symbolism of the type to arrive at the complete meaning. The Catholic Church has essentially confirmed this usage of the word anti. In the 1994 Catholic Almanac on page 158, there is, quote, the list of men who claimed or exercised the papal office in an uncanonical manner. So these men tried to substitute themselves for the true pope and usurp that office, so to speak. The Catholic Church denies the papal authority of the men on that list because they attempted a substitute, meaning to falsify their claim on the papacy. That list is a list of anti-popes. So the word anti can clearly mean a substitute for something. So this is a very interesting bit of history with the anti-popes. We covered some of it, like when there were I forget who it was. Was it Innocent or whoever it was? But for 8 years they didn't have popes, and it was like the longest period in time. And there's these conflicts between the various families, and sometimes you would have an anti-pope, and factions would form. So there was a lot of schismatic situations. And the fact that the Catholic Church recognizes that the anti-popes were a thing, an anti-pope is in place of the real pope, then they agree that the prefix anti means in place of. So when you're dealing with antichrist, just like anti-pope, you're dealing with somebody who is in place of Christ. Very important testimony there to tell your Catholic friends. The word antichrist. Antichrist can be correctly interpreted then as someone who substitutes himself for Jesus Christ, the Son of God, just as an anti-pope substituted himself into the office of the papacy. The Vicar of Christ, Vicarius Christi. This is cited from Catholic Dictionary by Peter M.J. Stravinskas. Vicar of Christ, title used almost exclusively for the Bishop of Rome as successor of Peter, and therefore the one in the Church who particularly takes the place of Christ, but used also of bishops in general and even of priests. First used by the Roman Synod in AD 495 to refer to Pope Gelasius, more commonly in Roman curial usage to refer to the Bishop of Rome during the pontificate of Pope Eugene III, which was in the 1100s. Pope Innocent III asserted explicitly that the Pope is the Vicar of Christ, further defined at the Council of Florence in the Decree of the Greeks in 1439. and Vatican Council I in the Pastor Aeternus, 1870. The Second Vatican Council, the Lumen Gentium, number 27, calls bishops in general vicars and legates of Christ. All bishops are vicars of Christ for their local churches in their ministerial functions as priest, prophet, and king, as the Pope is for the universal church. The title further denotes they exercise their authority in the church not by the delegation from any other person, but from Christ himself, which again, this is an invented link between Jesus and these people. This is the lie from the Garden of Eden that we read very clearly in Duties and Dignities of the Priest, in all of those encyclicals and papal bulls and everything else. Ye shall be as gods. Just as Jesus is high priest and king and prophet, so are you king and priest and prophet in his place on earth. That is not true. And hopefully more people will realize that before the time comes. The words vicarius and vicar. Now look up the word vicarius in almost any common dictionary. Here is what you would find in the Webster Handy College Dictionary: substituting for or feeling in place of another, for vicarious. Also in Webster's second New Riverside Desk Dictionary for the definition of vicar: a parish priest in the Church of England, a clerk in the Episcopal Church in the charge of the chapel, one who serves as a substitute for another. A vicar general is defined in the 1994 Catholic Almanac on page 330 as a priest or bishop appointed by the bishop of a diocese to serve as his deputy, with ordinary executive power in the administration of the diocese. So a vicar serves in the place of, substituting for, the bishop, and assumes his power of office for certain duties. So the papal title, the Vicar of Christ, which in Latin is Vicarius Christi, means a substitute for Christ, which is synonymous with antichrist, i.e. assuming the power of God on earth. This blasphemous claim is made repeatedly by various popes and is the very foundation of the Roman Catholic religion and its papacy. Some Catholics may protest that the Pope represents but does not substitute for Jesus Christ, to avoid the association. Hopefully you know otherwise by now. Now, from the Webster Hand College Dictionary, the definition of the word represent is to portray, depict, describe, to play the role of, impersonate, denote, symbolize, stand for, speak and act for, be a substitute for, set forth, assert, be composed of, consist in. Keep the word impersonate on, because we're going to have a cool little caricature I found of, I think it was Pope Pius IX. Gosh, it's such a great character. It really seals the deal. We'll look at that at the end, though. Clearly, then, the Vicar of Christ, Vicarius Christi, and the Antichrist have exactly the same meaning. The Pope substitutes himself in place of God on earth, and that is exactly the meaning of Antichrist. Exactly. Vicar of the Son of God. Some Catholics will claim that the title Vicarius Filii Dei is an anti-Catholic fabrication and a complete fake, never used by the Catholic Church. One example of this was online at the Catholic Envoy magazine in the article titled Pope Fiction by Patrick Madrid. Another Catholic apologist, Carl Keating of the organization Catholic Answers, in a debate in the fall of 1989 with José Ventilación of Iglesia ni Cristo, stated the following, quote, "The whole Iglesia argument against the Catholic Church is a big fraud, and let me prove it to you. From Pasugo, God's Message, I mentioned in my opening remarks, Iglesia is so fond of claiming that the Pope is the beast of Revelation. We know that the beast of Revelation has the number 666, right? This is a Catholic apologist, answering somebody in a debate. So just keep that in mind. Now, here is the argument. Follow this carefully. The popes have what is known as the tiara. That means a triple crown. A triply high crown, 3 levels. The beast can be identified. You find a man whose name when adds up to 666, or a man whose title adds up to 666. Now, Iglesia ni Cristo says 2 things. One, that the title of the Pope in Latin is Vicarius Filii Dei, and second, that the title appears on the 3 bands of the tiara. I have in front of me a photocopy of the September 1766 issue of Pasugo. Here is a drawing made by the staff showing the tiara with those words on it. This is just a pen drawing. 2 things to say. Does the title Vicarius Filii Dei add up to 666? Yes, it does. But is that a title of the popes? Have they ever used it? No. Do you know what Vicarius Filii Dei means? It means vicar or representative or agent, vicar of the Son of God. The Pope has never used that title. No Pope ever. The official title of the Pope, one of several, is Vicar of Christ, not Vicar of the Son of God. We Catholics claim he is the representative on earth of the God-man, the Messiah, not the second person of the Trinity as such. Well, that's not what they think of themselves. But you see, the Vicar of Christ in Latin is Vicarius Christi, and when you add the letters up, they don't add up to 666. So the first thing that the Iglesia Ni Cristo has done, and as I say, it repeats this story every 4 issues or so in its magazine. The first thing is to claim that the title of the Pope is Vicarius Filii Dei. That's a lie. It's not at all. Why does it claim that? Because it wants to find a title that adds up to 666. It doesn't care about the truth. There's a link to the video, and it's cited and everything else. You can watch it. The following evidence is proof positive that Vicarius Filii Dei is indeed genuine. The first one's donation of Constantine. The donation of Constantine is the most famous forgery in European history and was discovered in the pseudo-Isidorian decretals in the 9th century, between 1847 to 1853, or 847, 853, so in the 9th century. The forger is thought to have been Johannes Simonides, John the Deacon of the 9th century. The pseudo-Isidorian decretals are fictitious letters alleged to be from early popes between Clement, around the 100 AD to Gregory the Great in 600, collected by Isidore Mercator in the 9th century. Since the scholarly criticism of the 15th century, they have been known to be forgeries and have been called pseudo-Isidorian decretals, or false decretals, to acknowledge that they are fraudulent. The donation reads in part as follows in Latin, caps added for emphasis. And it's got, the Latin there, and it says Vicarius Filii Dei. Remember when all of the popes were citing the Constantine and how Constantine basically acknowledged the Pope as God, and this is what they're citing. Okay, this is the forgery, the document that they used for centuries to cite the Pope's authority, one of them. But this is a forgery. Anyway, in the document it says Vicarius Filii Dei. You can see that yourself. In English, that is the following. As the blessed Peter is seen to have been constituted vicar of the Son of God on the earth, so the pontiffs who are the representatives of that same chief of the apostles should obtain from us our empire and the power of supremacy greater than the clemency of our earthly imperial serenity is seen to have conceded to it. Continuing beyond the Latin above, says, choosing that the same chief of the apostle and his vicars to be our constant intercessors with God, and to the extent of our earthly imperial power, we have decreed that his holy Roman Church shall be honored with veneration, and that more than our empire and earthly throne, the most sacred seat of blessed Peter shall be gloriously exalted, we giving to it power and dignity of glory, and vigor and honor imperial. And we ordain and decree that he shall have the supremacy as well over the 4 principal seats, Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, and Constantinople, as also over all the churches of God in the whole earth. And the pontiff, who at the time shall be at the head of the Holy Roman Church itself, shall be more exalted than and chief over all the priests of the whole world, and according to his judgment, everything which is provided for the service of God and for the stability of the faith of Christians is to be administered. That's from Christopher Coleman's The Treatise of Lorenzo Vella on the Donation of Constantine. Photos of a 16th century copy of the donation previously online at the Vatican Secret Archive website. Below, you'll see it. The phrase Vicarius Filii Dei appears at the end of the 5th line down at the left page of the 7th photo. The image below is enlarged by 100% and sharpened to make it readable. See this page? You can also see the page itself. So you can see, we can actually even look at it. Let's see. Does it go? Oh, this is the actual transcription. But, this is the physical, you can see it here. You can kind of make it out. Vicarius Filii Dei. And the text is transcribed here. Here's Vicarius Filii Dei. The donation of Constantine has two parts. The first relates the alleged conversion story of Constantine to the Christian faith and is called the Confessio. The second part, called the Donatio, lists the authority, privileges, and property bestowed on the papacy by the emperor. Again, this is a forgery, and they used this for centuries to justify their imperial power. It was later incorporated into most of the medieval collections of Catholic canon law. Yeah, we looked at, for example, Gratian's Decretum and other decretals and things like that. University of Zaragoza Library. This is one of these pages. You can see Vicarius Filii Dei, one of those old manuscripts. So it was used and incorporated. This term, Vicarius Filii Dei, which was originally part of a forgery done in the 9th century, meaning in the 800s, was incorporated into official Catholic dogma and doctrines. We saw it, for example, with the Gratian's Decretals and the Decretals of Gregory the Ninth, how they were using this title, Vicarius Filii Dei, because they incorporated it from that document. that means that they were using it to support their authority, and they never repudiated it. It took them centuries to finally come around to saying, oh, this is a forgery. But they didn't repudiate the fact that they used this title. So that's interesting. All right. At the right is the page of Gratian's Decretum, printed in 1512, with the title Vicarius Filii Dei indicated by the arrow. Yeah, we looked at that. The donation of Constantine was cited in writing by no less than 10 popes as proof of their civil authority and sovereignty over Rome, and what came to be known as the Papal States, which included a large portion of Italy. It was also eventually exposed as a pious fraud in 1440 by Laurentius Valla, who proved the donation had to have been written several centuries after the death of Constantine. The Vatican condemned Valla's scholarly work by listing it in the Index Prohibitorium, the Index of Prohibited Books, in 1559. And as late as 1580, the official edition of the Corpus Juris upheld the genuineness of the false decretals. So the donation of Constantine was held to be genuine for centuries, almost 8 centuries, that it was held to be genuine and used as an authoritative proof that, look, we are the vicar of the Son of God and have all glory and honor due to us. Catholics finally abandoned the defense of the authenticity of the donation of Constantine shortly after Cesare Baronius published his Annales Ecclesiastici in 1592, which admitted the fraud, although the donation entitled Vicarius Filii Dei continued to appear in canon law and other Catholic publications well into the 19th century. So for 1,000 years, they used this title. And there's the citations of, basically all those various works. Here are the papal documents in which Vicarius Filii Dei appears in various forms. Pope Leo IX, In Terra Pax Hominibus, 1054. Pope Nicholas IV, letter to Caedonius the Tartar in 1289. Pope John XXII, Licet Justa Doctrinam, 1327. Pope Paul VI, Rivi Muniensis, 1965. Pope Paul VI, Baffianae, 1968. So, well, for 1,000 years they were using this title. Now, let's look at Pope Leo IX, 1054. In Terra Pax Omnibus. Vicarius Filii Dei used by the Pope Leo IX in an official letter that resulted in the Catholic Church being split in two. So one of the first usages of this blasphemous title resulted in the schism of the church. That should tell you the spirit behind this particular thing. According to the 1913 Catholic Encyclopedia entry on the donation of Constantine, we learn the following. The first pope who used it in an official act and relied upon it was Leo IX in a letter of 1054 to Michael Cerularius, Patriarch of Constantinople. He cites the Donatio to show that the Holy See possessed both an earthly and a heavenly imperium, the royal priesthood. Gregory VII himself never quoted this document in his long warfare for ecclesiastical liberty against the secular power. But Urban II made use of it in 1091 to support his claims on the island of Corsica. Later popes, Innocent III, Gregory IX, Innocent IV, took its authority for granted. And those are various sermons and things that they've published and decretals. And ecclesiastical writers often adduced its evidence in favor of the papacy. The medieval adversaries of the popes, on the other hand, never denied the validity of this appeal to the pretended donation of the Constantine. The authenticity of the document, as already stated, was doubted by no one before the 15th century. So they believed in it for quite a long time. And again, this is cited from the Catholic Encyclopedia. The text of the letter of Leo IX to Michael Cerularius in Terra Pax Omnibus is cited in the following works: Several Tracts Against Popery by Michael Geeds, 1715. In this letter, which the 1913 Catholic Encyclopedia deems an official act, Pope Leo IX was asserting his primacy as the Bishop of Rome, and to that end he reproduced that portion of the donation containing Vicarius Filii Dei for the edification of the Greek Patriarch. Here, I want to edify you, just let you know that you need to bow down to me. In the prologue of his citation of the donation, Leo IX said in affirming the donation as genuine, quote, "But lest perhaps some scruple may still remain with you concerning its earthly domination, that is the papacy's, and that you may not so much as lightly suspect that the Holy Roman See seeks to vindicate and defend its unshaken honor with foolish and old wives' fables, we will here produce a few privileges which were confirmed by the hand of said Constantine, by which truth will be confirmed. We do not follow learned fables, but do manifest unto you power of our Lord Jesus Christ. Know ye that the same glorious prince in the aforesaid privilege did thus promulgate the special dignity of the Roman Church." So in other words, listen, we have God's favor, so you need to submit to us. Look, here's proof. And of course, it's a forgery. As this author who is documenting these things says, quote, "Was there ever any truth spoke of with more assurance or with a greater air of devotion than Constantine's donation, and the Roman Church never having made use of fables as spoke here by Leo? As Leo is, you see, in his prologue to this donation, very peremptory that it is authentic, so he triumphs in his epilogue to it, as if its being so were made indubitable by him, saying, wherefore truth, being supported by these and many more such testimonies, does not blush, but impudent vanity is confounded." This is like Old English stuff, so it's a little heady, sorry. "If this Pope had any shame in him, he would never have ventured on this occasion to have spoke either of blushing or of impudence, or if he had any, or if it had any religion, would he have dared to have made such a grimace as this? For as if he himself believed all that he hath here so positively and with so great an air of religion concerning these donations being undoubtedly authentic, he was certainly the simplest and most credulous man that ever put pen to paper. So if he did not believe it himself, as it is more than probable he did not, he was a most profane and vile hypocrite to cant about it as he does. However, that this Pope saith here so dogmatically of the instrument of the Constantine's donation and its being authentic ought to be remembered." Yeah, so he probably, who was it, Pope Leo the Ninth? He probably knew that it was a forgery, which makes it even worse, is what this guy is saying. The letter begins with the Intulatio, Leo Episcopus Servus Servorum Dei, which is the characteristic of official papal bulls. It was addressed to Michael Ceruleus, Patriarch of Constantinople, and Leo, Metropolitan of Achrida, and was in response to a letter sent by Leo, Metropolitan of Achrida, to John, Bishop of Tranum, Bulgaria, that categorically attacked the customs of the Latin Church and differed from those of the Greeks. Especially criticized were the Roman traditions of fasting on Saturday, Sabbath, and consecration of unleavened bread. Now, this is very important because people kept the Sabbath, and Rome did everything possible to make that day a burden. Leo IX in his letter accused Constantinople of historically being, the source of heresy, and claimed in emphatic terms the primacy of the Bishop of Rome over the Patriarch of Constantinople, who would have none of it. After Leo's assertion of primacy was summarily rejected, Patriarch Ceruleus was excommunicated by papal legates who entered Constantinople's St. Sophia during the liturgy on July 16, 1054, and publicly threw down the bull that anathematized Ceruleus on the altar table. Oof. By that dramatic act, the church was split into two, and the great schism that has ever since divided East and West. Don't worry, that schism is going to heal pretty soon, folks, but this is how it happened. It happened because of pride and ego from the beast. The full Latin text of the Epistle of Pope Leo is online, yada yada, you have all of the citations. The full Latin text of the nation is online, so on. Vicar of Jesus Christ, Pope Innocent III, Inter Corporalia. Pope Innocent III popularized the title Vicar of Jesus Christ. In Inter Corporalia, he claimed that as the Vicar of Jesus Christ, only the Roman pontiff could remove or transfer bishops, because he acted not with human, but with divine power and authority reserved for the Roman pontiff alone. Here's the Latin text, and it says, "For it is not by human, but rather divine power that spiritual marriage is dissolved, when, as by translation or cessation by the authority of the Bishop of Rome, whom it is known to be the Vicar of Jesus Christ, a bishop is removed from his church. These three are reserved to the Roman pontiff alone, not so much by canonical institutions as by divine institution." In Licet in Tantum, Pope Innocent III stated that he was the successor of Peter and the Vicar of Jesus Christ. There's the Latin with the citation, and the text reads as follows. "For instance, man cannot overthrow the bond of a legitimate marriage of husband and wife, the Lord saying in the gospel that which God hath joined together let no man put asunder. So also in the spiritual covenant of marriage, which is between the bishop and the church, which begins in the election, is ratified in the confirmation, and in the consecration is completed. It is understood, can be dissolved without the authority of he who is the successor of Peter and the Vicar of Jesus Christ." Some more Latin here. This is Sermo 2. We looked at Sermo 2 for Innocent 3 a couple little sections ago. So in Sermo 2, some more blasphemy for you. "Now, therefore, you see the servant who is appointed over the family, verily the Vicar of Jesus Christ, the successor of Peter, the Lord's anointed, the God of Pharaoh, placed in the middle of between God and man, the side of God, but beyond man, inferior to God, but greater than man, who judges all and is judged by no man. the apostles' affirming voice, "He who judges me is the Lord." Now, we read this famous quote from Innocent III. But just confirmation. All right, let's see a little more. St. John Lateran Cathedral figures prominently in the Bible prophecy as it has the official cathedra or throne of the Bishop of Rome. It is the oldest or mother church of Christendom, and it was in fact formerly the palace of the emperor bequeathed to the Pope when Constantine vacated Rome for Constantinople, leaving the Bishop of Rome to fill the vacuum. This is mentioned in both the donation and in the book of Revelation. Of course, Revelation talks about how the dragon gave the beast its throne, which is very interesting. And at the left is a picture of Pope Benedict the, 16th? On the throne of the apse of St. John Lateran Cathedral, formerly the palace of Emperor Constantine the Great, now the official cathedra of the Bishop of Rome. St. John Lateran is located on one of the 7 hills of Rome. Isn't that interesting? History is so interesting, isn't it? This used to be the throne of Rome, and now it is the throne of Peter. Vicar of God, Pope Nicholas II, 1278, Fundamenta Militantis Ecclesiae. The Vicar of Christ, Vicarius Christi, a title of the Pope implying his supreme and universal primacy both of honor and jurisdiction over the Church of Christ. The title Vicar of God used for the Pope by Nicholas III is employed as an equivalent for the Vicar of Christ. That's from the Catholic Encyclopedia, 1913. In Fundamenta Militantis Ecclesiae, a papal constitution issued July 18, 1278, Pope Nicholas III decreed that the city of Rome was to be governed by a senate composed of Roman citizens, but only with his express papal approval. And you can see here it's highlighted Romani Pontificis Vicari Dei. So the Vicar of God is the Roman Pontiff. Vicar of Christ, Son of God, Pope Nicholas IV, 1289, letter to Caedonius the Tatar. Pope Nicholas IV, in a letter dated July 13, 1289, inviting Caedonius the Tatar to embrace the Christian faith, assured him that the Roman Pontiff's office of Vicar of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, was in fact a divine appointment. Here's the Latin text, and it says, Vicarius enim Jesu Christi Filii Dei est. So we are, don't worry, we are Jesus Christ on earth. You can obey us. Augustinus Triumphus, 1243 to 1328. Summa de potestate ecclesiastica. 14th century canon lawyer applies Vicarius Filii Dei to the Pope. Here's the original text. It's by Agostino Triumpho of Ancona. His name is Augustinus Triumphus. He's in the 1300s. And it's from the text, Summary on the Power of the Church, Summa de Potestate Ecclesiastica. Triumpho was expressly commissioned by Pope John XXII to produce a book that would set forth and defend the ecclesiastical and temporal authority of the papacy. The result was Summa de Potestate Ecclesiastica, which was completed in the year 1320 and dedicated to the same pope, and is considered the high watermark of papal pretensions. And you can see it here in the text. You can see, where is it at? Yeah. So some of these are De Filiis Vicarius. Sometimes they're, if you're searching for these things in manuscripts, sometimes the order is not Vicarius Filii Dei, but in this case it's De Filii Vicarius. De Filii Vicarius. Sometimes the script will say Vicarivus, right? Instead of U, it's a V. Sometimes it might be abbreviated. You'll see some examples of that too, but just be aware if you're doing some of that research. Let's see. The Summa de Potestate Ecclesiastica of Augustinus Triumphus has been described as one of the half-dozen most influential and most important books ever written on the nature of the papal supremacy in the medieval ages. And that is cited from The Growth of Political Thought in the West by C.H. McIlwain. Augustinus' Summa de Potestate Ecclesiastica is an extensive treatise counting over 600 double-column pages in early printed editions. It consists of 112 questions divided into 3 major parts. There are at least 24 extant manuscripts of the complete work, and another 15 containing fragments. The Summa received 5 editions in the 15th century, and the 4 successive editions in Rome, beginning in 1582 and ending in 1585, which was the last edition of Augustinius' work. The University of Maryland claims 29 editions of the Summa were published between 1320 and 1584 in Latin, and it is held by 55 libraries worldwide. Note that the Summa was coming off the press of Rome during the early years of the Catholic Church's enforcement of the Tridentine Index of Forbidden Books, which began in 1546 under Pope Pius IV and the Council of Trent and remained in effect for over 300 years. The The 1582 printing is prefaced by an endorsement of Augustinius Romanus Sacrista et Ordinus yada 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 under the name of Pope Gregory the 13th. The crest of the Pope is with the winged dragon, which is also interesting with these crests that they have, appears on the title page as shown below. In Summa, Agostino applied Vicarius Filii Dei to the papacy. Refer to the following guide for the Latin and corresponding English for each section of Summa. The Latin spelling varies slightly depending on the abbreviations used. So here's the cover of it, and we're going to look at these various, basically Latin translations. They have the Latin, and then they're going to translate the text into English. Let's see. Question 1. Oh, so basically, you can see so we're not going to read these things in full. I want to show you that all of these use Vicarius Dei, Vicarius Dei, Vicarius Dei, Vicarius Filii Dei, Vicarius Dei Filii, Vicarius Este Dei Filii. And if you want the original manuscript, this is the all transcription of these from question. It tells you which question it is, which number it is. For example, if you want to go to question this, you can just go here. And you have here's the original manuscript. Now we have to find it, and we have to go back. Photo 126, Vicarius Dei, see 16th line from the top. All right, so you just follow the instructions if you want the original document, which we will do. Okay, how about we just try opening another? Okay, there it is. Sometimes my Firefox is going super, super slow. 16th line from the top. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. There it is. I think I see it. Vicarius Dei. You see it? Vicarius Dei. So all of these have original manuscripts cited if you need to see it for yourself, but they use Vicarius Dei, Vicarius Dei, Vicarius Dei, Vicarius Filii Dei, Vicarius Dei Filii. It's all over. Okay, that's the point. Same thing here. All of these various manuscripts of Vicarius Dei, Vicarius Dei, Vicarius Filii Dei, Vicarius Dei Filii, Vicarius Jesu Christi, Vicarius Dei, Vicarius Christi. This is over, and look how many instances of these are. So these, if we go back up to the top here, this was written in. Look at these Masonic types of, seals too, which is interesting. This is 1473, 1475, 1476, 1479, 1484, 1487, 1582, 1584, and so on. So throughout this time, they were using this title over and over again in official church documents, sanctioned by the Pope. Dr. Johannes Quasten, in the 1900s, a renowned Catholic patristic scholar, considered perhaps the greatest authority in this field, when questioned in 1943 about Vicarius Filii Dei, freely admitted in writing that, quote, the title Vicarius Filii Dei, as well as the title Vicarius Christi, is very common as the title for the Pope. So it is reasonable to assume that Dr. Quasten was indeed aware of the title appearing in Summa and in Leo IX's letter, thus his concession that it is very common. These extraordinary and blasphemous claims in Summa deserve special attention. Question 6, point number 1. This is the Latin, this is the translation. Second reason, considering the role of the Pope. Only the Pope is said to be the vicar of God, because he alone is able to bind and loose, possessing alone loosing and binding given to him by God. The decision of the Pope and the decision of God constitute one decision, just as the decision of the Pope and his disciple are the same. Since therefore an appeal is always taken from an inferior judge to a superior, as one is greater than himself, so no appeal holds when made from the Pope to God, because there is one consistory of the Pope himself and of God himself, of which consistory the Pope himself is the key bearer and the doorkeeper. Therefore no one can appeal from the Pope to God, as no one can enter into the consistory of God without the mediation of the Pope, who is the key bearer and the doorkeeper of the consistory of eternal life. And as no one can appeal to himself, so no one can appeal from the Pope to God, because there is one decision and one court of God and the Pope. We looked at this quote. I don't know if it was the same document or if this was in a different document we looked at it, but we looked at this quote. So more confirmation for you. Question 9. De Exhibitione Honoris Papae, page 71, 1582 edition, displaying the honor to the Pope. Here's the Latin. It's our Article 1 in the question 9. The translation is as follows. So proceeding on that first point, it is to be seen as fact that the honor that is due Christ as God is due also to the Pope. Because the honor is due the power, and the power of Christ is God, and the power of the Pope are one, which is shown to be true. So from the first apparent use of Vicarius Filii Dei by a pope in the official act of 1054 to the last printed edition of Triunfo's Summa de Potestate Ecclesiastica in 1585 in Rome is a total of 531 years that they were using this title and basically using it to claim their earthly and heavenly power over all things. The Pope changed Sabbath to Sunday. We'll look at a little bit more of this in my upcoming Lord's Day presentation. So stay tuned for that. If you're watching in the future, I'll be doing a Lord's Day presentation. But this is more documentation of them changing the Sabbath to Sunday and saying we're above the law, we can change the law. And they're using this Dei Filii Vicarius, Vicarius Este Filii Dei, Vicarius Filii Dei, and so on, as proof of their basically supremacy to be able to do that. Moving on. Licet Juxta Doctrinam, Pope John the 22nd, October 23rd, 1327. Let's see. Those vain or rather lying talkers say that all priests, whether pope, archbishop, or simple priest, are by Christ's appointment equal in authority and jurisdiction. That insofar as one has more than another, this is according as the emperor has conceded to one or another either more or less. And that as he concedes to one, so he may withdraw it. Such doctrines as these are contrary to the truth and smack of heretical depravity. So if you don't acknowledge the primacy of the Pope above all of the other priests, and he's the God of gods, then that's heresy. The Christian Emperor Constantine testified, saying the Blessed Peter is seen to have been, we saw that, this is quoting again the donation of Constantine, and it's quoting it in his encyclical Licet Juxta Doctrinam in 1327. So that's documented. Ecumenical Council of Florence, 1438 to 1445 by Pope Eugene IV. We looked at Eugene IV, but we didn't look at this particular council, I don't think. Here's the Latin of the particular synod and the translation. We likewise define that the Holy Apostolic See and the Roman Pontiff hold the primacy throughout the entire world, and the Roman Pontiff himself is the successor of Peter and the chief of the apostles, and the true vicar of Christ, and that he is the head of the entire church, and the father and teacher of all Christians, and that a full power was given to him in blessed Peter by our Lord Jesus Christ to feed, rule, and govern the universal church, just as it contained in the acts of the ecumenical councils and the sacred canons. I think we did look at this particular quote, but this, where is it? Vicarium Christi, somewhere in here. Doesn't say. Let's see if I can find it. Verum Christi Vicarium. Here we go. This is what it is. Christi Vicarium, meaning the vicar of Christ. Same thing. Remember, vicar of Christ, vicar of the Son of God. These are all synonymous with taking the place of God on earth, being a false Christ. This is another one, session 7, 4th September 1439, the decree of the Council of Florence against the Synod of Basel. Here's the Latin, and the translation is, similarly, we too, to whom, though unworthy, the Lord Jesus Christ has designed to entrust his people, as we hear of abominable crime that certain wicked men dwelling in Basel have plotted in these days so as to breach the unity of the Holy Church, and since we fear that they may seduce some of the unwary by their deceits and inject them with their poisons, are forced to proclaim in like words to the people of our Lord Jesus Christ entrusted to us, depart from the tents of these wicked men, particularly since the Christian people is far more numerous than the Jewish people of those days. The church is holier than the synagogue, and the vicar of Christ is superior in authority and statutes even to Moses. So again, vicar of Christ. So more blasphemy for you, documented in 1439. Remember, a lot of the stuff in 1439 was also the Inquisition happening. You know, you had the Waldenses and these people that were basically rebelling to the church, becoming more and more prevalent, so the beast was flexing its fangs. Pope Pius II, January 1459, Execrabilis. This is a section taken from that. You have links to these sources for yourself. You can see the decretals yourself, but we're going to translate this paragraph, and it says, an execrable and in former ages unheard of abuse has sprung up in our time, namely that some people, imbued with the spirit of rebellion, presume to appeal to a future council from the Roman Pontiff, the Vicar of Jesus Christ, to whom it was said in the person of blessed Peter, feed my sheep, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound also in heaven. They do not do so because they are anxious to obtain sounder judgment, but in order to escape the consequences of their sins, and anyone who is not ignorant of the laws can realize how contrary this is to the sacred canons and how detrimental to the Christian community. Same thing, addressing heretics and people who aren't obeying, but they use, where is Vicarium Christi? Let's find it. Jesu Christi Vicario. Here you go. I'll magnify it. Jesu Christi Vicario. You can see that. So these are all documented everywhere. Pope Pius II, April 26, 1463, Retractio in minoribus agentibus. This is section 3, and this is translated. In the militant church, which resembles the triumphant, there is one moderator and judge of all, the vicar of Jesus Christ, from whom all, as from the head, all power and authority is derived to subject members, the which doth immediately flow into it from the Lord Jesus Christ. Here he is using Jesu Christi Vicarius. Section 10 in the same bull. In one flock the fold was contained even just as the present day they are contained, and that there is one bridal chamber of Christ, the one bride, the one fold, and one shepherd, and one overseer of all the bishops, the Bishop of Rome, the successor of the blessed Peter, and the vicar of Jesus Christ. This is how they get you, man. It's just fascinating to listen to the snake speak. One bride, one church. Also, us too. We're in there too. Don't worry, we're in there too. Give us a little bit of that power. One more. This is all Christian people, that all people, all kings, all clergy, all the bishops venerated as their leader, the vicar of Jesus Christ, blessed Peter's successor, the head and rector of the universal church. So all people, all kings, everybody in the world need to venerate the leader, which is the vicar of Jesus Christ, the one who is in place of Christ. You need to venerate that person. And remember, from those other quotes, the glory and honor and all the names that are due to Jesus are also due to the Pope. Blasphemy. Alphonsus Guerrero, 1559, Thesaurus Christianae Religionis. In 1559, in Venice, Alphonsus Alvarez Guerrero, a Spanish civil and canon lawyer noted for his expertise in antiquities of the church, and advisor to King Philip II of Spain in Naples, Italy, published his Thesaurus Christianae Religionis, treasure store of the Christian religion. A detailed exposition of the powers, rights, and duties of Christian authorities, civil and spiritual. He twice applied the title Vicarius Filii Dei to the Pope, asserting the authority of the Pope over the Holy Roman Emperor, a title granted by the Pope at his discretion to the German kings via a formal ceremonial crowning. The first such crowning of the German King Otto I by Pope Johannes XII in 962 was referred to as the Translatio Imperii. Based on the papal-sanctioned transfer of power to the Germans, Pope Innocent III in 1202 claimed continuing authority to examine, anoint, consecrate, and crown each German king as he saw fit in the bull Venerabilium Fraterum Nostrum, which we read. We read from that bull, remember, back in Pope Innocent III. The text of the bull in Latin, and you have a link there. So here's part of this from this text, the Thesaurus Christianae Religionis. And it says, after God's chief apostle has given his approbation, with which it is evident that the Roman Emperor is Lord or universal protector of Christians, supreme power is from God, and next is the Pope, who is the vicar of the Son of God. And it says Vicarius Filii Dei in the text. And this was in 1559. Chapter 56, De Imperio et Translatione, okay, yada yada. Another section from this work. Quote, with this notwithstanding, the power of confirmation has always been accorded to the Lord Pope, who is the vicar of Christ, who is the vicar of the Son of God, notwithstanding because his papal confirmation is not known when emperors have previously been faithless. Note two things. Dominum Papam, the Lord Pope, okay, because we're going to come to the next one, Dominum Deum Nostrum Papam, our Lord God the Pope. But the Pope is called the Lord Pope, okay, our Lord. And he was also called the Lord Pope, qui est, who is the vicar of the Son of God, Vicarius Filii Dei. So it's all in there. Cardinal Juan de Torquemada, Summa, in 1561, Summa de Ecclesia. Juan de Torquemada was a Spanish theologian and member of the Dominican order. His monumental Summa de Ecclesia defended papal supremacy and infallibility and strongly opposed the conciliarists. Thomas de Torquemada, the Grand Inquisitor, was his nephew. And Thomas also, I believe, was a crypto-Jew, which was interesting, because I think he was a Jesuit and a crypto-Jew, but I could be wrong about one of those. So anyway, these are from his various works, and you can see the Latin here, Vicarius Filii Dei, Vicar of the Son of God. The text says, to the second objection concerning the donation of Constantine is answered by a minor denial. The Roman pontiff does not have his primacy by Constantine, but by Christ. To blessed Peter and Peter's successors, as said in John, feed my sheep. And for proof concerning Constantine, whatever 96, the answer is that the entire thing cannot conclude that by Constantine the Roman pontiff had primacy. Constantine says that Blessed Peter and his successor, the Roman pontiff, inherited this primacy from Christ, to whom he said, thus and so, such and such. He did not give the privilege of primacy to the Roman pontiff, but he believed it a command from Christ to be observed and honored by all the churches in the world, thus showing that he, Constantine, is not the author of papal primacy, but rather the executor of the law as Christ ordained, as has been said above in chapter 41. So, is Torquemada in 1561 still promoting the donation of Constantine? Yes, he is. He's basically saying that, well, Constantine is just executing what Christ commanded, which is to honor the Pope and give all authority to the Pope, because he's the vicar of the Son of God, Vicarius Filii Dei, which is right there. Giovanni Battista Ziletti, 1577, Conciliorum su Responsorum. Here's the Latin of the section in question, the citation, and the text says, and if the Pope cannot order nor dispense contrary to the law of God of the Old and New Testament, even though he is of Christ, vicar of the Almighty Son of God, according to this, thou art Peter, I will give thee the keys to the kingdom. The emperor is less able to dispense contrary to the Old Testament and the New. So, Vicarius Christi Omnipotentis Dei Filii Vicarius is being used constantly throughout all of these years. B. Antonini Archiepiscopi Florentini, 1581, Summa Sacrae Theologiae. In 1581, volume 3 of Summa Theologicae by Archbishop of Florence, St. Anthony, was published in Venice. In Title 22, Chapter 5, Section 16 deals with the donation of Constantine and quotes it to include Vicarius Filii Dei on the page number 401. Then in Section 22 on page 403, the title is applied to the Pope as follows. Here's the Latin text, and we're going to read it. As much as to the first, since the Pope is the vicar of the Son of God, Vicarius Filii Dei, there it is, Vicarius Filii Dei, as that God made the creatures as if by means of the mediation of secondary causes, the whole he would do directly by himself, so the Pope has at least as much power of jurisdiction. Similarly, he can govern directly all the faithful or by means of the ministers of the church. So just like God does stuff, we do stuff too. Same thing. Andreas Hellwig, 1600, Questionis ane certum ali, some long title there in Latin. The first known association of Vicarius Filii Dei with 666 appeared in this Latin text. The translation of the title is Investigating Proof that a Name of Antichrist Exists that Exactly Corresponds to the Apocalyptic Number 666, Incontrovertibly Handled. That's the title of the book. So it's basically a book on the Antichrist and the name. Autore Carolo Agle Nonio, so on and so forth. So, in 1612, he published this book, Antichristus Romanus, Improprio whatever. Roman Antichrist particularly names that the apocalyptic number 666 that contained treachery in Wittenberg, which also identified Vicarius Filii Dei. The contribution of British writers between 1560 and 1830 to the interpretation of Revelation 13 by David Brady in 1983. So this book, Andreas Hellwig, 1612, is documented in a book by David Brady in 1983. And basically, people started by the 1600s, very early on, to associate and realize that there was a connection between this title that the popes have been using, that they were forced to use to assert their authority in response to all these, power struggles. Now they're forced to use this thing, which made it easier to identify the beast. It's just so fascinating how God uses these things. Here's the book. Here's the cover of the page from 1612. Hellwig shows that the mystic name must yield the required number, must agree with the papal order, must not be a vile name applied by enemies. This is also important too. It's not a name that his enemies are calling him. It's it's a name that he chooses for himself, but acceptable to the Antichrist himself, and 4, must be one of which he can boast. Hellwig takes Vicarius Filii Dei as an expansion or equivalent of the officially used shorter papal title Vicarius Christi, and shows that it conforms to these 4 requirements, citing Slidanus in his Commentarius Historicis, Book 2, for the decretal of Aeneas Silvius, which employs the title Vicarius Christi only. Explains choice of Vicarius Filii Dei. Explaining his emphasis of Vicarius Filii Dei, Hellwig checks it by his 4 rules. Quote, But behold that this present name, Vicarius Filii, in every way is such as is required. For first, it is a Latin name, and most exactly renders with significant letters that apocalyptic number. Then it harmonizes wholly and always with the papal order in itself, even though by hypothesis, as no pontiff denies, then it is not offensive or vile as imposed upon him by adversaries, but is especially honorable to this very one, venerable and formidable to others, which all the pontiffs have now already ascribed to themselves for more than 600 years, as is apparent, and do ascribe today and wish to be ascribed on, which account they vehemently glory and boast with an execrable voice that they hold, shared as it were with the omnipotent God, the rule throughout the earth in human affairs. This is what, among other things, for who may investigate all swelling words of papal bulls, yeah. There's just thousands and thousands of documents. It's just so much, I'm sure, that we could probably find, but you'd spend a whole lifetime doing it. That decretal of Pope Annus Silvius, who wished later to be called Pius, makes clearly evident that decretal published in the year 1459 at Mantua, which John Sladen notes in his Historical Commentaries, Volume 2, in which he, the Pope, took care that nobody should appeal from the Pope to a council because he said that in the nature of things, nothing greater could be found above the Vicar of Christ, which we read that quote in that particular section. And this is that Hellweek guy commenting on it in the 1600s, that they've been using this title for already 600 years, so he knew what's going on. This is Antichristus Romanus in 1630 by the same author, Andreas Hellwig. In 1630, Hellwig published Antichristus Romanus, yada, 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 yada. This is a long title. Hellwig's association of Vicarius Filii with 666 and the role that the title has played in history is documented and discussed in depth over 850 pages in The Truth About 666 and the Story of the Great Apostasy. 3 volumes in one by Edwin de Kock, copyright 2011. That's 546 years from Pope Leo IX's letter to the first public revelation in 1600 that the phrase equaled 666. 546 years that Vicarius Filii would not have been denied as applying to the Pope by anyone in the Roman Catholic Church, and even so, it continued to appear in Catholic canon law and other Catholic publications for additional centuries. In the chapel of St. Sylvester, part of the Basilica of Santi Quattro Coronati, located in Rome on Coelian Hill, between St. John Lateran and the Colosseum, a series of frescoes commissioned by Pope Innocent IV and completed in 1246 depict various events in the life of Pope Sylvester I. These are very interesting frescoes, and you can look them, if you're listening to this, you can look it up yourself. But in the fresco panel shown above, Emperor Constantine is offering his crown to the Pope. Where do they get that from, I wonder? Illustrating the donation of Constantine. And in the following panel, the triumphal Pope, riding on horseback and wearing Constantine's tiara, is led through Rome by the humbled emperor who is on foot. Another painting representing the donation of Constantine shown below is in the Vatican, in the Sala di Constantino. It was painted by Raphael in his workshop from 1519 to 1525, along with depictions of Constantine's baptism, his vision of the cross, and his vision of the battle at Milvian Bridge. So at the time, it would seem the donation of Constantine was still considered to be genuine. Now, really quick pause. Isn't this just fascinating? How, again, these situations were being used by the beast to assert its dominance. And probably some of the popes knew that these things were forgeries, but they were using them anyway to manipulate people into obeying them. And God used it for them to document and testify against themselves. Not only that they're basically blaspheming God, but also this transference of power. Constantine was the last Roman pontifex, right? Before the popes really came in and started to take over eventually in like the 500s. But this idea that there's the transference of power between Constantine and the Pope is now carrying this power forward for the pagan system, the throne of the devil. It's just so fascinating. It's just so fascinating. And of course, this is based on a forgery, but it's also being used by God and history to reveal to you something profound, which is the continuation of empires, that you're under the fifth and final empire. Not a religion. This is not a religion. It's an empire. It's the continuation. It's the seat of the devil. So profound how these things are used by God to show you the truth. Here's another picture by Raphael. And again, these things are very common during the time. This is in the 1500s because they were based on this mythology that Constantine, acknowledged the Pope as God on earth and gave his sovereignly power over the state submitted to the church. That's why the church needs to be above the state. This is a mythology. It's just smoke and mirrors, just like how Catholics misinterpret, the whole thing with Peter being the rock, which we'll look at today quite a bit. But this is a mythology. They've created a mythology and, basically reused it as the foundation for their power. The kneeling Constantine is handing Pope Sylvester I a statuette of Roma Eterna, eternal Rome. Look at this. You can't get any better than this, man. The continuation of empires. And if actually, it's interesting, just another tidbit. I've talked about this before, but there are coins of Roma Eterna, the personification of Rome as a woman, basically in this militaristic, outfit, leaning on 7 mountains. There's a coin, I forget when, from the early times of Rome, but there's a coin of Rome as Roma Eterna, leaning on the 7 mountains. She sits on 7 mountains, which is just, and that is being handed to the papacy. It's so cool. I love history. Symbolizing the transfer of power from the emperor to the papacy. On February 23rd, 1520, about 4 years before Raphael's painting of the donation was completed, Martin Luther, in a letter to Spalatin, wrote the following: I have at Lorenzo Valle's proof the donation of Constantine is a forgery. Good heavens, what darkness and wickedness is at Rome. You wonder at the judgment of God, and such unauthentic, crass, imprudent lies not only lived, but prevailed for so many centuries that they were incorporated in the canon law, and became as articles of faith. I am in such a passion that I scarcely doubt that the Pope is the antichrist expected by the world. So closely do their acts, lives, saying, and laws agree. This is from The Art of Renaissance Rome by Lauren Partridge. All these excessive, over-presumptuous, and most wicked claims of the Pope are the invention of the devil, with the object of bringing an antichrist in due course and of raising the Pope above God, as indeed many have done and are now doing. It is not meet that the Pope should exalt himself above temporal authority, except in spiritual matters, such as preaching and absolution. In other matters, he should be subject to it, according to the teaching of St. Paul and St. Peter, as I have said above. He is not the vicar of Christ in heaven, but only of Christ upon earth. For Christ in heaven, in the form of a ruler, requires no vicar, but there sits, sees, does, knows, and commands all things. But he requires him in the form of a servant to represent him as he walked upon earth, working, preaching, suffering, and dying. But they reverse this. They take from Christ his power as a heavenly ruler and give it to the Pope, and allow the form of a servant, quote unquote, to be entirely forgotten. True. He should properly be called the counter-Christ, whom the scriptures call antichrist, for this whole existence, work, and proceedings are directed against Christ to ruin and destroy existence and the will of Christ. I think this is also Martin Luther's writings. Yeah, his address to the nobility of the German nation in 1520. One more here. It is also absurd and puerile for the Pope to boast for such blind, foolish reasons in his decretals pastorales that he is the rightful heir to the empire. If the throne be vacant, who gave it to him? Did Christ do so when he said the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, but he shall not do so? That's Luke 22. Did St. Peter bequeath it to him? It disgusts me that we have to read and teach such impudent, clumsy, foolish lies in the canon law, and moreover, to take them for Christian doctrine, while in reality they are mere devilish lies. Of this kind also is the unheard of lie touching the donation of Constantine. It must have been a plague sent by God that induced so many wise people to accept such lies, though they are so gross and clumsy that one would think a drunken boor could lie more skillfully. How could preaching, prayer, study, and the care of the poor consist with the government of the empire? These are the true offices of the Pope, which Christ imposed with such insistence that he forbade them to take either coat or scrip. For he that has to govern a single house can hardly perform these duties. Yet the Pope wishes to rule an entire empire and to remain a Pope. This is the invention of the knaves that would fain become lords of the world in the Pope's name, and set up again the old Roman Empire, as it was formerly, by means of the Pope in the name of Christ, in its former condition. Fascinating to see how people responded to these things over the centuries and started to wake up and realize who the beast was. As the beast was being revealed, more and more and more revelation. Vicarius Filii and Vicarius Christi listed as equivalent papal titles in 1659. Here's the document. This is Epitome Canonum Hominum by Laurentius Procati, page 630, in Rome Mascardi, 1659. So the Latin here is basically Papa est Vicarius Filii Dei, ficut paternus. So Vicarius Filii Dei is listed here, and it's also somewhere it's probably supposed to say Vicarius Christi, but I did not highlight it somewhere. Somewhere it says it. But anyway, you can look at this for yourself. These are equivalent titles, Vicarius Christi, Vicarius Filii Dei. It says the same thing. So Pope John the 22nd called Vicarius Filii Dei in 1669 and 1718. This is the particular source, the bull Privilegium Sabbatinae, and the translation is the Sabbath Privilege Edict. What the most pious and devout Carmelite Mother of God requested from heaven, the Vicar of the Son of God, ratified and promulgated on earth. John the 22nd, in a long celebrated bull called Sabbatina, beginning Sacrissimo, yada, yada, yada. So he is called the Vicar of the Son of God in 1669. You can have the original source there if you want. In the controversial bull Sacratissimo ut culmine, as though in the most sacred heights of John 22nd, dated March 3rd, 1322, or Bulla Sabbatina, John 22nd affirmed an indulgence for members of the Carmelite order. Wearers of the scapular of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, known as also as the brown scapular, are promised to be quickly freed from the flames of purgatory, at least by the Saturday after their death. The bull states the following: Hail, Queen of Mercy and our hope, so as I prayed with bended knees, the Virgin of the Carmels seemed to speak to me these words. So now we're saying that the entity who calls itself the Virgin of the Mount Carmel spoke to him these words. O John, vicar of my well-beloved son, Vicarius Christi Dei, or Vicarius Filii Dei, I shall snatch thee, as it were, from thy foe. Thee who art Pope, I make my vicar for the solemn gift which I sought from my son and have obtained by my prayers. So it behooveth thee to grant a favor and confirmation to my holy and devout order of Carmel, which took its rise from Elias and Eliseus on the mountain of that name. Pagans in their mountains, man, their high places. It's nothing new under the sun. Whoso maketh profession, whoso observeth the rule drawn up by my servant Albert the Patriarch, whoso unfailing shows obedience thereto and to that which has been approved by my dear son Innocent, so that thou mayest accept through the true vicars of my son on the earth that my son hath ordained in heaven, that he who shall have persevered in my holy obedience, poverty, and chastity, or shall enter the holy order, shall be saved. So if you do this, you will be saved. So this being who is communicating to this particular pope was the one who is affirming the title of Vicarius Filii Dei, which should tell you everything, because this is not Mary, so who is it? And affirming all of these things, affirming a false gospel, you have to do this in order to be saved. You know, you have to create these orders. They're good. They're my orders. They're very useful to me. What does it tell you, folks, about the seed of the devil? It's Catholicism. One more, this holy indulgence I therefore accept, I confirm and ratify on the earth, just as Jesus Christ has graciously granted it in heaven, on account of the merits of the Virgin Mother. The defense of the Roman Church and the Pope, 1696. Just as we believe the Pope succeeds St. Peter in the whole of his power and is the vicar of the Son of God, like Peter. And it says Vicarius Filii Dei right there. 1696 is used. Vicarius Filii Dei, you can look these up. These are official documents. Bibliotheca Maxima Pontifica, 1698. Vicarius Filii Dei, same thing. And this goes on. Vicarius Filii Dei and Vicarius Christi listed as equivalent papal titles in 1728. This 3-volume ecclesiastical anthology lists papal names, titles found in various texts of general councils, Gratians decretals, and letters, bulls of popes. So you can see here, it says Vicarius Filii Dei, yada, 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 and probably Vicarius Christi somewhere, but I don't see it. Anyway, it lists Vicarius Filii Dei, which is the important thing, that they're still using it as a papal title in 1728. Almost 1,000 years after the forgery was made. Yada, yada, yada. This is all like translations of these various things. We can skip a little more here. Vindication of the Popes, 1756. This is the Latin section of page 90 of the Vindication of the Popes against opponents of all kinds. And on page 90, you see this, Jesu Christi Filii Dei Vicarius. Again, you have, if we click on this, we can see this. Here it is. You see? Here's the original document. I didn't do this for all these sources because you can do them on your own if you want. The actual original manuscripts, here they are. They're linked to the Google Books section or wherever they happen to be in PDF form. And you can see it, Filii Dei Vicarius. So this is in 1756. Vincent Howdry, Society of Jesus, 1767. When Honorius II died in 1130, two rival groups of cardinals elected two popes, Innocent II and Anacletus II, which took 8 years to resolve. We talked about this when we looked at Innocent II. In the end, Innocent II was declared the valid pope by St. Bernard of Clairvaux. Now, the comment on that, which is in Latin, is as following. From the Bibliotheca Constitutionaria Complectens, really long Latin title by Thomas Secundus in 1767. So this is commenting on the thing that happened with Innocent II. In the Latin, it's translated to, as to great authority which St. Bernard had in the church and the knowledge of it should be noted, when Pope Honorius died, the votes in the election of a successor had in an amazing way gone two different directions. Then there was to be seen on the same body two heads, upon the same throne two princes, over the same subject of the Lord, in the same fold two shepherds, one surreptitious, the other legitimate. There a usurper, here the true vicar of the Son of God. Now, isn't it funny, again, that this is testifying against the beast in many ways? In the first is that you're still using this Vicarius Filii all the way into 1767, commenting on this previous issue with Innocent II, and also commenting on this fact that there was a usurper of the Pope, and he's trying to be in his place, when the Pope is actually doing the same thing to Jesus, which is just so fascinating. Again, if you have discernment, you can see right through these things so easily, but most people are just blinded by tradition and clever argumentations. They don't walk in the truth. God sends them strong delusion because they did not love the truth. If they loved the truth, they would see that all of these things are built on lies and not fall in love with tradition, with the lust of the eyes, with all pretty things and running a rat wheel and all these things, and just instead fall in love with the truth. Vatican's Salon Sistino, named for Pope Sixtus V, who commissioned its construction, the Salon Sistino, or Apostolic Library, is on the top floor of the building that is the north end of the Cortile de Belvedere from east to west, connecting the Belvedere and Vatican Palace. Richly decorated by Giovanni Guerra, Cesare Nebbia, and assistants, there are several frescoes of note. On the east end of the Grand Hall, there is a fresco of the First Nicene Council in 325. Beneath the fresco is the inscription, the following: Silvestro Constantino Magno, some Latin. Without the abbreviations, the first line reads, Sanctus Silvestro Papa Flavio Constantino Magno Imperatore Christus Dei Filius Patri. So again, Christus Dei Filius Patri. The inscription of the states that Pope Sylvester and Pope Flavius Constantine declare Christ the Son of God and Father consubstantial, condemning the Arian heresy. In the fresco, Bishop Osius of Cordoba is presiding and is seated at the top center. He is flanked by Pope Sylvester's legates, Victor and Vincentius. The crowned Emperor Constantine, who has convened the council, is seated in the left center foreground, and Christ and God the Father are seated in the top top left. Okay, so this wasn't about Vicarius Christi. They're basically describing to you this thing, but it does say Vicarius Christi later in another section. At the opposite or west end of the Salon Sistino is another set of three related frescoes on the center pilaster between the arched doorways. On the left side of the pilaster, Christ's right hand, is a pope standing with triple cross and tiara with the inscription Christi Domini Vicarius. So there it is in this fresco. The center fresco depicts Christ seated. Over his head is Alpha and Omega, and his hand is an open book that reads Ego sum Alpha et Omega, Principium et Finis, the beginning and the ending. And at his feet is the inscription Jesus Christus Summus Magister Soletis Doctrinae Avoctor. The fresco on the right side of the pilaster depicts an emperor standing with crown, sword, and blue mantle. The inscription reads Ecclesia Defensor, defender of the church. So, the Sistine Hall suffered severe damage in December 22nd, 1931, when central support columns and a large portion of the roof totally collapsed and plunged through 2 floors, but it was completely rebuilt and restored. In 1793 and later editions, the book Apocalyptical Key, an extraordinary discourse on the rise and fall of the papacy by Robert Fleming, was reprinted with the assertion by the editor that Vicarius Filii was inscribed over a door of the Vatican. See page 48. The fresco of a pope on the pilaster between Vatican Library and the Celestone Sistino, while admittedly not having the exact wording and on a pilaster rather than over the door, is the closest known example that may have been the inscription referred to in this and other books. So it seems that when they restored it, this again testified against them using it well into the late 1700s. Lucius Ferraris, who we read quite a bit about, in 1755 wrote an elaborate multi-volume theological reference work or encyclopedia titled Prompta Bibliotheca, which we looked at, in which he quoted the donation of Constantine, including the phrase Vicarius Filii Dei in Article 2 of the entry Papa, Pope. He cited the revised canon law as his authority. Here, the covered page, volume 5 of an edition published in 1858, noted that it carries the blessing of Pope Gregory the 16th, Sanctissimi de Gregory, so on and so forth. So here's the cover of it. And so it has the blessing of the Pope. Below is part column 1828 from volume 5 of the Prompta Bibliotheca in 1858, Paris edition, where the title Vicarius Filii Dei appears in number 20 of the article 2 of the entry on the Pope, which I have indicated with an arrow. Again, this is a quote from the donation of Constantine. So where's the arrow? Here it is. You can see it. Vicarius Filii Dei. This is in 1858. Ferrari's work was later revised, enlarged, and once again published in Rome by the Sacred Congregation de Propaganda Fide in 1890. In that edition, the document and the papal title Vicarius Filii Dei were still retained. So they were still retained 40 years later, approximately 30 years later, in 1890. According to the 1913 Catholic Encyclopedia, a further revised edition of Prompta Bibliotheca was published in Rome by the Press of the Vatican's Office of Propaganda in 1899, which very likely retained that title as well. Wolfgang Froelich, 1790. Who is Peter? This is from Qui est Petrus Sequelus Petri Primatus. This is, again, in 1790. It was a work by this man named Wolfgang Froelich. And the section in question is, the supreme pastor of the church, the vicar of Christ, and the Son of God, successor of St. Peter, the Roman pontiff Pius VI. And they use Christi Filii Dei Vicarius, Vicarius of the Son of God, the Jesus Christ. L'Abbé Jéhuam, however you pronounce that in French, 1845, Catechisme de Perseverance. This is in French, and it is Vicaire de Filii de Dieu. So you can see here they're using the same title, but it's in French, the Vicar of the Son of God. In spite of his painful work, the Vicar of the Son of God, Peter carried out an extremely frugal life. So they're still referring to the Pope as the Vicar of the Son of God. Cardinal Henry Edward Manning, 1862, The Temporal Power of the Vicar of Jesus Christ. We looked, I believe, at one of his works previously. And these are just highlighted. I highlighted it for you here. Vicar of Jesus Christ is used. It's on page 140. Page 141, Vicar of the Son of God is used. Page 230. Somewhere, St. Gregory is a period of apostolic conversion of the nation's faith. I don't know why this one's highlighted, but anyway, in page 231, Vicar of the Son of God. Page 232, Vicar of the Son of God. So it's several times in this work by Cardinal Henry Manning in 1862. Several places. Cardinal Edward Manning in 1871, the Vatican Council and its definitions. For what is the temporal power but the condition of peaceful independence and supreme direction over all the Christians and all Christian communities, inherent in the office of Vicar of Christ and head of the Christian Church? When the civil powers became Christian, faith and obedience restrained them from casting so much as a shadow of human sovereignty over the Vicar of the Son of God. They who attempt it now will do it at their peril. Don't rebel against the beast, otherwise you might get it. This is in the Vatican Council and its definitions, Pastoral Letter to the Clergy in 1871. Vicarius Filii Dei in the text of the donation of Constantine in an 1869 Vatican printing of the Cardinal Deusdedit's Canon Law, compiled in 1087 AD, online at Google Books. Below is a copy of the cover page of the Catholic Canon Law, Corpus Juris Canonici, and Gratian's Decretals, published in 1879 in Germany by Emil Friedberg. This is the copy. The donation of Constantine is quoted in column 342, part of which is shown below. The phrase Vicarius Filii Dei is found near the center of the paragraph. Here it is. You can see it. See, in this case, it uses the U instead of the V. See, you say Vicarius, but it's actually Vicarius. So you have to be aware of that when you're reading for these things. We're trying to search them in a PDF because sometimes the OCR, it might recognize it as a U or a V. So anyway, there it is in 1871, something like that. So we're still towards the late 1800s. We're still using this title. In the many hundreds of years that the donation of Constantine appeared in Catholic canon law, it was apparently always presented as genuine historical document legally granting the papacy temporal power and authority For to acknowledge it was a fraud would have been to admit that power and authority of the papacy to be likewise fraudulent. Yeah, exactly. With the forced loss of the Papal States from 1798 to 1870, the territorial sovereignty that the papacy had acquired via the donation was gone, until 1929 when Mussolini and the Lateran Pact granted its sovereignty over the Vatican City State. This is from 1881. Monseigneur Louis Gaston de Ségur, Familiar Instructions. Same thing. This is basically a document in 1881. Vicar of the Son of God, Vicarius Filii Dei. Our Sunday Visitor, November 15th, 1914. They go on about basically using Vicarius Filii Dei and this whole thing about the papal tiara. The Sunday Visitor is a Catholic publication, and this is in 1917, and they're using it as well. And there's this whole thing with them. I'm not going to read it. You can read it if you want. But the point is, Our Sunday Visitor and its Catholic answer again explained Vicarius Filii Dei in the question of the day on November 2011. Question of the day for Thursday, November 24th, 2011. What does Vicarius Filii Dei mean? Vicarius Filii Dei, what does it mean? Is it a phrase referring to the Pope or the priest? I have heard that it is inscribed on the Pope's hat or something. Just curious to know what it is. Lloyd Howell. Here's a reply from Father Reginald Martin. Let's see, what does the snake have to say? Vicarius Filii Dei means vicar or representative of the Son of God, a term scholars believe that first appeared in a document known as the Donation of Constantine, dated to the 8th or 9th century. This is an apt description of the Pope, who is frequently referred to as the Vicar of Christ. And at present, probably only the most bitterly anti-Catholic individuals would take offense at the title. Yeah, so if you take offense to this title, you're just bitterly anti-Catholic. However, this has not always been the case. Foes of Catholicism from the 16th to the 19th centuries delighted in pointing out that the title could be turned into 666, that is the mark of the beast in the book of Revelation. Those who have enjoyed Tolstoy's War and Peace may smile as they remember that Napoleon's name and title can similarly be manipulated. This is why, again, you should not use numerology proofs, especially when you're dealing with Catholics. Don't use those proofs. That's not your strongest point, folks. This is just something to relish in after you've already accepted the fact that the beast is the papacy. It's not something to argue with somebody who doesn't believe that. It's not primary evidence, because they're just going to snake their way around it. An early reader asked our Sunday Visitor about that title, and the newspaper replied in 1915 that it was inscribed on the papal tiara. A short time later, the journal printed a correction, which was repeated in a 1922 article. Scholars have examined the existing papal regalia, this amounts to quite a collection, and have found no evidence that any papal crown carries the title. We looked at one of those crowns, and it had a similar blasphemous title. Most recently, the online edition of our Sunday Visitor had this question to answer. Question: why would the Pope have inscribed on his mitre Vicarius Filii Dei, which is not an official title for the Pope, instead of Vicarius Christi, which is an official title? Answer: the Pope can do whatever he wants as long as he is faithful to Christ. The Code of Canon Law states, no appeal or recourse is permitted against the sentence or decree of the Roman Pontiff. So the Holy Father himself can determine what is an official title because he is the official. All the same, there is really no difference between the term Vicarius Filii Dei and Vicarius Christi. The first means Vicar of the Son of God, and the second is translated Vicar of Christ. As the Son of God is Christ, the two mean the same thing. So, again, the same priest, Father Hoffman, Francis Hoffman, is telling you that Vicarius Christi and Vicarius Filii Dei are the same thing. They're equivalent in meaning. Very important, because we looked at that previously. Sightings of the papal tiara and mitre. The most plausible name we have ever seen suggested as containing the number of the beast is the blasphemous title which the Pope applies to himself and wears in jeweled letters upon his mitre or pontifical crown. The title is this: Vicarius Filii Dei, Vice-Regent of the Son of God. Taking the letters out of this title, which the Latin uses as numerals, and giving them numerical value, you come up to 666. Thus, we have V, etc., 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 and so on. The following extract on this point is from a work titled The Reformation, bearing the date of 1832. Mrs. A. said Miss Emmons, I saw a very curious fact the other day. I have dwelt upon it much and will mention it. A person lately was witnessing a ceremony of the Romish Church. As the Pope passed him in the procession, splendidly dressed in his pontifical robes, the gentleman's eye rested on the full blazing letters in front of the mitre, Vicarius Filii Dei, the Vicar of the Son of God. His thoughts, with the rapidity of lightning, reverted to Revelation 13, verse 18. Will you turn to it? Said Mrs. Alice. Will you turn to it, Miss A? Alice opened the New Testament and read, Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. She paused, and Miss Emmons said, he took out his pencil, and marking the numerical letters of the inscription of his tablet, it stood 666. Here we have indeed the number of a man, even the man of sin, and it is a little singular, perhaps providential, that he should select a title which shows the blasphemous character of the beast, and then cause it to be inscribed upon his mitre, as if to brand himself with the number 666. So that's from a book called The Reformation, A True Tale of the 16th Century by Anne Tooles Jones. Note that Anne Bullard on page 247 presents the title with the word Vicarius, the old Latin spelling that uses a V for a U. This is likely to be the form of the word used if it appeared on a papal tiara or mitre. Uriah Smith, on the other hand, misquotes Bullard using the unlikely English spelling Vicarius, which has the OU. Smith, in his later publication, changes this to be a more modern Latin Vicarius, using only the U as shown below, which also may be the way it was inscribed with jewels on the papal tiara or mitre. The most plausible expression we have seen suggested containing yada yada yada. This title there is to be reason to believe was formerly inscribed upon the Pope's crown. The following testimony on this point is given to the elder D.E. Scholes of Washburn, Minnesota, I'm guessing. I have met two men who declare that they have seen this specific crown, and their testimony is so perfectly in agreement that I am convinced that what they saw is true. The first man was M. Delati, a Sabbath keeper who had previously been a Catholic priest and had spent 4 years in Rome. He visited me when I was a pastor at St. Paul, Minnesota, several years ago. I showed him my tract, the seal of God and the mark of the beast. He at once told me that the inscription was not correctly placed in my illustration. He stated that he had often seen it in the Museum of the Vatican and gave a detailed, accurate description of the whole crown. When my tract was published in 1895, I was ignorant of the arrangement of the words of the Latin inscriptions. Hence, in the illustration of the crown, placed them in one line. Brother Delati at once pointed out the mistake and said that the first word of the sentence was on the first crown of the triple arrangement, the second was on the second crown, and the word Dei was on the lower division of the triple crown. Now we saw, really quick pause, we saw one of those crowns how they would have layers of these different words on each of the crowns. So this is a consistent testimony with that particular thing that we actually saw physical proof of. He also explained that the first two words were in dark colored jewels, while the Dei was composed entirely of diamonds. During a tent meeting which I held in Webb City, Minnesota, I presented the subject, the seal of God and the mark of the beast. I used charts to illustrate it, one being a reproduction of the crown as Brother Delati had described it. A Presbyterian minister was present, Reverend B. Hoffman, and when I described the crown, he spoke out publicly and made a statement to the congregation, saying that while in Rome studying for the priesthood, he had seen this very crown, and noted its inscription that the word Dei was composed of 100 diamonds. I met him and learned his name and visited him in his home, and was convinced from his description that this was the identical crown that Brother Delati had seen, but which has been denied by many. I then asked him for a written statement, and he gave me the following. To whom it may concern, this is to certify that I was born in Bavaria in 1828, was educated in Munich, and was reared a Roman Catholic. In 1844 and 1845, I was a student for the priesthood in the Jesuit College in Rome. During the Easter service of 1845, Pope Gregory XVI wore a triple crown upon which was the inscription in jewels Vicarius Filii Dei. We were told that there were 100 diamonds in the word Dei. The other words were of some kind of precious stones of a darker color. There was one word upon each crown, and not all on the same line. I was present at the service and saw the crown distinctly and noted it carefully. In 1850, I was converted to God and to Protestantism. 2 years later, I entered the evangelical church ministry, but later in my life, I united with the Presbyterian Church, which I am now a retired pastor, having been in the ministry for 50 years. I have made the above statement at the request of Elder D. Scholes, as he states that some deny that the Pope ever wore this tiara, but I know that he did, for I saw it upon his head. The following extract is from a work entitled The Reformation, bearing the date of 1832. I think we read this part. Yeah, we read that part. Easter Mass, 1843. A Reverend Joel Tyler Headley, in the April 1845 edition of the Christian Parlor magazine, wrote that he had visited Rome and witnessed the spectacle of the Easter services in St. Peter's, and mentioned that the Pope wore a triple tiara to and from the service, though he did not take note of the inscription. He also published his account and his letters from Italy, published in 1845 and 1847. In Putnam, yada yada, in which he dates his visit to St. Peter's Basilica in Easter of 1843. Now, they had a lot of tiaras. If you remember, they've used the tiara for hundreds of years, so I'm sure they had multiple types of blasphemous names, but I am also sure that given everything we've looked at, they probably had Vicarius Filii on one of the tiaras, but they deny that they did, because that would really be incriminating. I have received what seems to be reliable information that a photo may exist, similar to the one below, of a papal funeral in St. Peter's Basilica near the beginning of the 20th century, in which the tiara inscribed with Vicarius Filii can be seen. Combined with the above claims of our Sunday visitor, this would indicate that it was the funeral of either Leo XIII or Pius X, and that previous popes probably wore the tiara in question. If anyone can turn up any photos and make them available to me, I will post them in this article. Here's the photo, and of course, you can't really make out some of these things, and some people claim, here's the tiara, but you can't really make much of it from the picture, but supposedly, it's the tiara that has, this Vicarius Filii, as we saw in the other one, where it had, its various blasphemous names on each crown. The papal tiara was routinely worn both before and after the Pontifical Mass of the Vatican, is demonstrated by the following 1911 Catholic Encyclopedia entry. Pontifical Mass. Here's Pope Pius XII being paraded on his chair, like the Ark of the Covenant, with people pulling. See how they're pulling these things? So they paraded the popes like exactly as you would pull the Ark of the Covenant. This is exactly the mockery of that, really, is what it is, because people would have two poles for the Ark of the Covenant, if you remember, because you're not allowed to touch it, because you might get destroyed instantly. And of course, the Ark of the Covenant is what? It carries the presence of God. So they're carrying the popes around in these chairs, and the pope has this triple crown. This is Vicarius Filii, and he's on the throne. I mean, you can't get any clearer than this, folks. Blaspheming God and parading himself to be God. The solemn pontifical mass celebrated by the Pope in St. Peter's has some peculiar ceremonies. The Pope, wearing the falda amis alb cincture, pectoral cross, stola, cope, mantum, and tiara, is carried into the basilica on the sedia gestatoria under the canopy, and with two flabella borne on either side. The Pope returns to the altar to finish the Mass. After the blessing, the assistant priest publishes the plenary indulgence. At the end of the last gospel, the Pope goes to the sedia gestatoria, puts on the tiara, and returns in procession as he has entered. This is from the 1911 Catholic Encyclopedia. Here's another picture. What are they doing here? Worshipping the sun, as they usually do, with all this solar imagery. And this is the Fifth Empire on Earth, folks. The glory of Rome, masked in Christian garb. Note the following item is widely circulated Catholic publication from 1938. In it, the title Vicarius Filii and 666 is discussed, but the validity of Vicarius Filii as a papal title is not denied. Number 345. I have heard that he, the Pope, is antichrist, and that he was prescribed by St. John as 666, the numerical equivalent of the Latin words of the Pope's title, Vicarius Filii. So this is from a Catholic publication titled Radio Replies, I guess, first volume, by Reverend Leslie Rumble. And this publication doesn't necessarily deny that Vicarius Filii was used. So the answer to this is, that interpretation is absurd and rejected by all reputable scholars, Catholic and non-Catholic alike. In any case, St. John wrote in Greek that there is no warrant whatever for the translation to the Latin language. Moreover, whatever be true interpretation of this mystical number, it certainly refers to some one individual being. If it referred to one particular pope, it could refer to none of the others. To which pope will it be? Will people refer it to? To a past pope? Then he is dead and gone, and we need not worry about him. To the present pope, he is the very antithesis of all the conditions of the beast as described by St. John. However, the number does not refer to any of the popes at all. So that's the Catholic argument. Of course, they didn't deny that Vicarius Filii was used. They denied that the number applies to the pope. But remember, the number can apply to a title, not a man. And that's how the Catholics have inverted Bible prophecy. When the Bible talks to you about powers and kingdoms and institutions, because you're dealing with a systemic antichrist, the Jesuits inverted it to make it about the fleshly, low-hanging fruit, obvious things, like, oh, it's an individual. It's pin the tail on the antichrist, which all the dispensationalists have loved to do, and everybody else. Who's the antichrist? Is it Elon? Is it Trump? Is it Obama? Is it whoever else? That's designed to deceive you while you're looking for individuals, to not look at systems and powers and spiritual realities. Ellen White in 666. So he talks about how Ellen White, some people have said that Ellen White adds up to 666, but that's it doesn't work because the letters don't actually, the U is not V, it's U. And I think that, it doesn't matter. Ellen White was a false prophet, whether one way or another. Of course, he's defending it because he believes in Ellen White. So let's hope that he figures it out. But anyway, continuing on, we got a little more with this. Vicarius Filii Dei used twice by Pope Paul VI in an official papal decree. Vicarius Filii Dei was used twice by Pope Paul VI in documents found on the Vatican's website. These are apostolic constitutions, which are the highest form of official papal decrees in the Roman Catholic Church, and are issued with binding legal authority. Historically, these decrees were known as papal bulls, the name referring to the lead metal seal bulla attached to authenticate the document. As a general rule, the superscription that opens papal bulls typically reads, the name Episcopus Servus Servotorum Dei ad perpetuam rei memorandum. So the following apostolic constitution begins, Paulus Episcopus Servotorum Dei ad perpetuam rei memoriam, Paul, Bishop, servant of the servants of God, for everlasting remembrance of the matter. So, in this bull, Revi Muniensis, decree of Paul VI, let's see, we can even click on it. We can probably find the Latin. Filii Dei, okay, let's see. Filii Dei, yeah, here it is. It's actually right at the beginning. Filii Dei hic in terris vicari. We are the vicar of the Son of God on earth. We who the supreme God providentially wills and maintains in the principal position of Christ's church, the worshipful Son of God's vicar upon the earth. Filii Dei hic in terris vicari. This is 1965, folks. So 1,000 years after the forgery of Constantine, they're still using it because Rome is the center of lies. And the father of lies gave his throne to the papal institution. What do you expect? Here's another one, Baffiane in 1968. The Latin text is Adorandi Dei Filii Vicarius et Procurator, as the worshipful Son of God's vicar and caretaker. So it's still being used. Acta Apostolicae Sedis, Acts of the Apostolic See, is the official publication of the Holy See, and documents published in it are considered authentic and officially promulgated. The Vatican's website for their secret archives estimates that the total number of papal documents to be over 30 million. Yeah, like I said, good luck in finding everything the beast has spit out over the last 2,000 years. This is a staggering number of documents, and it makes it a virtual certainty that Vicarius Filii Dei was used in other official documents that have yet to be discovered. True. And there are people, like I said, like James Bowen, who do a great job of sniffing around through these things. I don't really care to do that. I really don't. I think I've documented sufficiently in this particular presentation. That's why I want to make it for you, so that you have enough. But there are people who sniff around, and there's constantly stuff being dug up. Claims to godhood, claims to authority, claims to godlike, whatever, glory and veneration, being praised by others as a God on earth. There's just so much. There really is. It's endless. God has given us plenty of evidence, folks. You just have to look at it. So, since the donation of Constantine, which was held by the Roman Catholic Church over 600 years to be a valid document transferring authority from the Emperor Constantine, Vicarius Filii Dei continued to appear in Catholic publications and official papal decrees well into the 20th century. This is irrefutable proof that it is not a Protestant invention. True. They held it to be genuine for 600 years, and even when it was exposed as a fraud, and initially those findings were condemned. And then eventually, like 100 years later, they came around to it. But they still kept using it for, 300 plus years afterwards. English translations of the above constitutions are not available on the Vatican website. However, regarding the translation of Rivi Muniensis, a similar wording in Latin was used by Cardinal Robert Bellarmine, which we looked at, that can act as a guide. Here is one example in his De Ecclesia Militante. And here's the translation. As thus understood, the definition of the church given by Bellarmine is thus usually adopted by Catholic theologians. A body of men united together by the profession of the same Christian faith and by participation in the same sacraments under the governance of lawful pastors, more especially of the Roman Pontiff, the sole vicar of Christ on earth. And that translates in Latin. It's in Latin. It's Principium Unius Christi in terris vicari Romani Pontificis. So they use that again over and over again this is the Catholic Encyclopedia 1908. Note that in the above translation of the Latin, Unius Christi in terris vicari Romani Pontificis, vicari does not apply to Romani Pontificis, i.e. the vicar of the pontiff, Roman pontiff, but rather it applies to the preceding Christi, vicar of Christ on earth. This indicates that in the similarly worded Rivi Muniensis, which we read above that, vicari applies to Filii Dei, meaning the Son of God's vicar upon the earth, not Petrice's successors, vicar of Peter's successor, or vicar of successor of Peter. Yeah, again, if you read it in context, the language tells on them because they're still using this title. As an English speaker might presume, it is also worth noting that Cardinal Bellarmine's definition of the Christian church excludes those who do not consider themselves subject to the authority of the Roman pontiff, which is to say the Protestants are not part of the church. From Crossing the Threshold of Hope by Pope John Paul II, which he has his own set of blasphemies I didn't document because they were a little bit documented in here, but let's read. First chapter, The Pope, a Scandal and a Mystery. Bold emphasis is mine. Page 3. The leader of the Catholic Church is defined by the faith as the vicar of Jesus Christ and is accepted as such by believers. The Pope is considered the man on earth who represents the Son of God, who takes the place of the second person of the omnipotent God of the Trinity. This is in the book, Crossing the Threshold of Hope by John Paul II. Here's another good one, classic, that I didn't document because I knew it was in this page. Have no fear when people call me the vicar of Christ. When they say to me, Holy Father, or Your Holiness, or use titles similar to these, which seems even inimical, i.e. hostile, to the gospel. Christ himself declared, Call no man on earth your father. You have but one Father in heaven. Do not be called master, for you have one master, the Messiah. The snake knows the word of God, folks. These expressions, nevertheless, have evolved out of a long tradition, becoming part of the common usage. One must not be afraid of these words either. Page 13. The Pope is not the only one who holds this title. With regard to the church entrusted to him, each bishop is Vicarius Christi. Now, this is now in whenever it was, with Pope John Paul II in the 80s or whatever it was. Is this consistent with Duties and Dignities of the Priesthood by Alphonsus Liguori, where the priests are gods and the Pope is the God of gods? Are we still talking that the priests are as another Christ? They're the vicar of Christ. And of course, the Pope is the vicar of the vicars of Christ, or whatever you want to call him. The God of gods. Are we still consistent with that blasphemous book? Yes, we are. Nothing changes. Because Liguori was canonized as a saint, which means his writings are approved Catholic dogma. They may not be pushed down your throat just yet, but this is what the church actually believes, folks. These people believe these things. And the people at the very top, the cardinals, the Jesuits, the Dominicans, all these people who are in orders, you have exoteric and esoteric. On the outside, it seems like it's the gospel. Of course, if you have discernment, you see right through it. But on the inside, it's the gospel of Babylon, the mystery religion. Note that on page 3 of the Pope's book, represents the Son of God is synonymous with vicar of Jesus Christ. A vicar clearly represents, substitutes for, or takes the place of another, as stated. Consequently, represents the Son of God can be translated in Latin as Vicarius Filii Dei, which in Roman numerals will add up to 666. The title Vicarius Christi, translated into English, means a substitute for Christ, antichrist, as demonstrated above, which is applied by the Pope to every bishop of the Catholic Church. Yeah, because they're all antichrists. When you are a priest and are trying to mediate forgiveness, offering sacrifices on an altar, you are usurping the priesthood of Christ and the mediatorial role of Jesus, and you are antichrist. Many Christs will come. Look, there's the Christ. Don't listen to them. This is a Seventh-day Adventist commentary on the Revelation, so on and so on. So I think that was it. That was plenty, I think. So, conclusion. What do we take from this little presentation? Well, take these things with the numerology as interesting phenomenon on top of everything else that you've already learned. People as early as Irenaeus in the 2nd century suspected that the power that was coming would come out of Rome in fulfillment of what Daniel and Revelation warned about. By the time the Reformation came around, that power was revealed a lot more through a variety of histories that even those people realized. Papal supremacy, claims of authority over monarchs, the Inquisitions, the corruptions, the selling of indulgences, the hedonism, opposing the Bible, burning Bibles, limiting people from having Bibles, freedom of conscience, all of the things that we've documented painstakingly. They were more and more revealed in the Reformation, and the Reformation established the historicist perspective. Of course, again, people in history like Irenaeus were looking in history for powers and principalities. So historicism is not something that the Protestants made up. Historicism is a method of interpretation. When Daniel was praying for, knowledge and revelation in Daniel 9, he perceived that the times were complete, meaning he was looking in the scriptures and perceiving that they were being fulfilled in terms of history. He didn't look in the script. My point is, he didn't look in the scriptures and say, these prophecies having to do with the 70 years of captive, this is just a symbol. It's numerology, and 7 is a symbol of completion, and then 10 is also completion. So you just multiply those two and you get like a lot of completion and whatever else. He was seeing it as 70 years in terms of a historical period that needed to be fulfilled. He wasn't seeing it as a preterist in sense like, it doesn't have to do with me. It's something that was fulfilled in the past somewhere because it's symbolic or whatever else. Or it's 70 days actually, and it was fulfilled in some little tiny captivity somewhere else. He was seeing it historically. Irenaeus in the 2nd century was looking at empires and historical fulfillments of things because people were looking at history as the second witness to Bible prophecy. So historicism is not a Protestant invention. It was definitely fleshed out much more with the Protestant Reformation because of all these revelations culminating in the Reformation and rebelling openly to this system, which of course helped people to see a lot more. But then of course there were still things that were not clear, like the mark of the beast, the image of the beast. That wasn't clear yet because the mortal wound hadn't happened. So by the 1800s, it was revealed even more with the French Revolution and the Pope being arrested. And then, of course, a couple decades later, you have the Bible societies, the resurrection of the Word, and even Seventh-day Adventism. Of course, there are many things that they get wrong, and I talk about that in my Adventist series, but they also contributed eschatologically quite a bit to the understanding of the papal antichrist, the image of the beast, and so on. So these things are very obvious to us now. Many years later, we're at the end of the end. Watch my, end times prophetic timeline. We're at the end of the end, folks, so it's going to be very obvious. Hopefully, it's obvious to you today. And the sad part is that for the most of the world, it's not obvious. They're deceived by this power, by this false Christ. They're deceived by it, and they will be deceived. So we have to do our best to learn this material. Like I said, I've belabored to organize it for you from all of these websites and sources and everything, all in one place, so you have it all in one place and you can study it and you can share it with others and help educate others. Take my resources, take the presentation notes, recreate the presentation to your friends if you want to, if they want to see hard facts and documents. It's all there, so there's no excuse. It's just about execution. Because this stuff could take a lot of work to organize. I'm sure Michael spent, hundreds of hours organizing his website. He has several pages. We'll look at another one with DOMINUM, DEUM, NOSTRUM, PAPAM. But this probably took a lot of work to put together. So let's not let it go to waste. Remember that numerology can do crazy things because number patterns exist in language. So don't place too much faith in these things. However, it's important that if you combine all these things with all the previous testimonies of history and scripture and how many intersections they are over the same power in history, then you have to admit that it's interesting. You really do. What matters more is not the numerology, but the title and how it was used to justify the papal supremacy and how it means literally antichrist. Vicar is a replacement. If you're the vicar of the Son of God, you are the replacement for the Son of God. Just as John Paul II said so eloquently in his blasphemous little book there, The Crossing the Threshold of Hope. Don't be afraid to call me Holy Father. It's true. Jesus said, have no man on earth your father. So he's giving you a choice. Revealing the method, he's giving you a choice. So that if you accept the deception, then you're destroyed. So don't accept the deception, but it's profound. So the Roman Catholic Church used this title for 1,000 years, okay, and it's well documented. It's well documented, folks. Anybody who says that this title is a Protestant invention or was never used by the popes is not aware of the truth. Or they're aware and they're lying. One of the two. The first instance of the usage of this title in terms of using it, because the title showed up in the donation of Constantine, which was in the 800s, 900s, something like that. But the first flex of this title was the thing that caused the schism of 1054 between the churches of the East and West. So the entire basis of the authority was a forgery. It was a fake. And what do you expect? Again, with the father of lies and his seat of power, which is built on smoke and mirrors. The papacy has no claim to authority. It has nothing based in truth. It is a lie. But it is such a convincing lie if you don't have the Holy Spirit and you have discernment. Throughout history, people realize the association and fulfillment of Bible prophecy through this power, and even connecting Vicarius Filii to 666 as another fulfillment of this situation, where Vicarius Filii adds up to 666, it's plastered on the tiaras, on their foreheads, they're bragging and blaspheming God. These things are obvious tangents. Again, I don't put the numerological weights too much into it, but it's also important to understand that the numerology of this title is not a Seventh-day Adventist thing. People were talking about this as early as 1600 and seeing the connections between these titles. And in the 1800s, you saw some of those letters of testimonies of people who were ex-Catholics who saw the tiara themselves. Now, again, I don't consider that as absolute proof. I'm not saying it is, but I mean, I'm very, what's the way to say this? I wouldn't be surprised if it was true. Let's put it that way. With everything we've looked at, with all the hard evidence we've looked at, it is not a far stretch of the imagination to believe these testimonies are indeed truthful. So do with it what you will. The point is we have plenty of evidence already. People realized these associations for many centuries, and they've been documenting it. And today we have the ability through the internet and through these various tools to look at them and learn and help others learn without having to go through all kinds of manuscripts and everything else. Everything is digital. Vicar means somebody who takes the place of or substitutes. Vicar of Christ or Vicar of the Son of God or any other equivalent title that they're using is what the popes have used for themselves to basically claim their authority. Because if they aren't the Vicar of the Son of God, then they have no authority. But there is no Vicar of the Son of God. The Son of God does not appoint a vicar to represent himself like the Father appoints the Son to represent God. Do you get it? They're copying and pasting that relationship to themselves to justify their power. And Catholics say, oh, well, it's, basically, she's just a representative. Well, no, that's not what they think. That's obviously what they think of themselves. They believe that they are actually bearing the person of Jesus on earth, the second person of the Trinity. They are like the Ark of the Covenant, bearing the person of God on earth. It's a counterfeit of the incarnation. So, with that in mind, I want to repeat, re-edify, recapitulate this idea about the mark of the beast. Because now that we have all this context, I think it's important to have some distinction so that you don't get lost. A lot of this stuff, especially from Seventh-day Adventists, again, I love my Seventh-day Adventist friends, but they can be a little dogmatic about certain things, and because of their legalism, they miss some important nuance in Bible prophecy. When you take the mark, you are not taking a chip on your hand, you are not taking a number on your hand or your forehead, you are taking the character of the beast upon you. What is the character of the beast? It is maximizing sin and rebellion. Blasphemy, blaspheming God to the highest degree, where you are basically blaspheming the gospel, blaspheming all that God has done in aligning with the beast, because that is the beast. The beast is a blasphemous power, disguised as the will of God. Now we know that Sunday is the papacy's mark of authority, and we know that for many reasons, because the way that the popes have enforced obedience, one of the ways, is through Sunday sacredness. And they have bragged about their mark of authority being Sunday. The popes have said, that we can change the times and laws. Remember, what's his name? Leo the 13th, that the mark of obedience, mark of a good Christian, is obedience to the Roman pontiff. So we see this consistently throughout history, that obedience to the Roman pontiff is the thing that basically gets you destroyed spiritually. So, in history, that has been enforced through all kinds of things: inquisitions, burning the Bibles, making you do certain things, resting on Sunday. There's many flexes of that papal authority and obeying the man of sin. Sunday laws in our generation are going to be a physical expression of the world obeying Satan and acknowledging Satan as the false Christ on earth through the Pope who claims to be God. Sunday laws are a symptom of the disease. They are not the disease. It's not that Sunday laws or going to church right now on Sunday is suddenly the mark of the beast, and if you went to church, you're done. You took the mark. That's not what it is, folks. Throughout history, it's always been about obedience, from the Garden of Eden all the way to the mark of the beast at the end. It's always been about obedience. And there's only two options: God or the devil. And man got into this mess because he obeyed the devil. Now, God is very poetic and harmonious in everything that he does. He can't help it. So the beginning shows you a picture of the end also. Just as Adam and Eve resting with God in paradise is a picture of the end, so too the fall of man is a picture of the end, and really the entire story. Remember prophecy threads. There are threads and types and shadows and things that are constantly going through time, and every generation has an expression of these threads. The mark of the beast is not something that just happens at the end. The mark of the beast has been throughout time. It has been the mark of obeying the devil as opposed to obeying God. And in obeying the devil, you are basically saying, I'm rebelling against God openly, I'm blaspheming God, and I'm fine with that. And the devil's job is to deceive you into believing that that's the will of God in this church age. In the church age, the devil can't enforce the mark in competition with God. So he has to counterfeit his mark and his mystery Babylon gospel as the will of God. The elect will not be deceived. As you can see throughout history, there's always been pockets of people to wake up and be like, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right. But the wicked are deceived, and they are allowed to be deceived so they can be destroyed. And at the end, the wicked will clamor after this power and marvel after this power. Because why? Because they did not love the truth. They did not love the truth, and so they're going to fall in love with the devil and believe it is the will of God, which is it's a profound thought. It really is. It's a mystery of iniquity. But Rome has always enforced its mark of obedience throughout time, whether, again, that was through inquisitions, papal supremacy, Sunday sacredness, whatever else. Sunday laws that are going to come are an expression of Rome demanding obedience, but it's much more nuanced than that. It's not about Sunday laws, folks. It is about total and utter obedience to the man of sin. It is about obeying the Pope as the supreme authority and believing that he is the one who needs to mediate for you on your behalf, the one who is the presence of God on earth, all of the things we've covered in the many hours of this presentation. That is what's coming back into society, which again, for some people may be very difficult to notice because you're just looking at the surface level. You're looking at the liberal world order that is collapsing. But I'm telling you that it's going to happen very quickly, especially now with Trump having taken over. It's going to happen very quickly. The old atheistic system is going away. Bye-bye. Super fast. The Zionistic system is going away. In the next couple of years, it's going to be gone. The Muslims are going to convert. The Jews are going to convert. And pretty soon, you're going to have the world marveling in the way that it was marveling for hundreds and hundreds of years. And if you do not respect this power as authoritative, if you do not believe that this power is the presence of God on earth, then you will be ostracized. One of the ways that they are going to enforce that obedience is by Sunday sacredness. And the people who will know that Sunday sacredness is part of the mark of obeying the devil will rebel based on the premise that the Pope is not the vicar of God, but he's the vicar of Satan. And that's going to be blasphemy. You're going to be accused of blasphemy. Of course, it's not blasphemy, but you're going to be accused of blasphemy, and you're going to be accused of being a legalist, a heretic, and everything else. So you will have to make a choice about who you obey. Just as it was in the beginning, so it is in the end. Everybody has to make that choice. Now, the good news is that if God has given you His Spirit, you'll make the right choice. But everybody has to experience that choice. Do you get it? Everybody has to experience that choice. This existence from the very beginning to the very end, everybody who was ever born in history and who God revealed himself to, has to make that choice. You have to choose God over the devil. And if you look in history at so many examples, Moses, when Moses was an Egyptian, he was in the world. And then he made a choice to run away and to serve God when God appeared to him. Everybody had a choice that they had to make. Abraham had to make a choice. And again, the good news is that you'll make the right choice if God is in your life. And God has given you understanding and discernment and the Holy Spirit. You'll make the right choice, but you have to experience that choice. You have to experience choosing God. The wicked cannot experience choosing God, and they'll be destroyed because they're going to get the counterfeit. So it's about total and utter obedience to the pontiff, because that is how Satan receives worship. Now, whether you believe the full frothing at the mouth version of the Pope is the presence of God on earth, like all of these militant Catholics throughout the centuries, or if you just believe, well, the Pope isn't the presence of God on earth, but whatever. I mean, he seems like it is a good authority and we should listen to him, and it's better than having a Muslim authority. Head or hand, doesn't matter. The devil just wants obedience. God wants obedience of both head and hand. You must believe that God is the Savior, the only Savior, and you must act out that belief. Otherwise, you're a hypocrite. The devil doesn't care if you're a hypocrite. The devil doesn't care if you don't believe that he's the presence of God on earth, as long as you obey. It's about obedience. For the people who believe or don't believe, as long as you obey, doesn't matter. God cares because God changes the heart. So you must have head and hand. Must be a sign on your head as frontlets between your eyes and as something around the hands. But anyway, the head and the hands are both required for God, whereas the devil does the opposite and says either or. So it's about obedience to the Roman pontiff. And now that you realize, hopefully, even if you realized before, hopefully you realize even much more, that the papacy is the false Christ on earth. And it's about obeying false Christ or true Christ. This is what it comes down to. It's not about Sunday laws. The physical test is going to be expressed in Sunday legislation, demanding Sunday sacredness, the Eucharist, the culture shaping that's going to be done around this obedience to the beast and this authority as the one who provides you with rest. So it's not just about Sunday sacredness, but it's going to be about the culture demanding that you submit to this authority. Why aren't you resting on Sunday? Why aren't you taking the Eucharist? Why aren't you doing things the way? Why aren't you believe in purgatory? Why aren't you do this? It's all of these blasphemous things that the papacy has created over the last 1,500 years, whatever it's been around, are going to push on you by culture so that you obey. And of course, one of the things that will tie it all together is going to church on Sunday and resting on Sunday, the Sunday sacredness, because it ties it all together. The Eucharist, charismatic experiences, doctrines of the Catholic Church, baptisms, all these things are going to be tied into, climate change Sundays, ecumenical Sundays. Sunday is the day that tie it all in. So it's the physical expression, but it's much more than just Sunday laws. And I feel that our friends who do focus on these things, because there aren't many, but the Adventists at least are crying about Sunday laws and Sunday laws and Sunday laws. And yes, Sunday laws are part of it, but when you're trying to explain this to other people who are not yet there with that idea, you need to, that's why I made this series, so that you can explain to them and show to them that the first thing they need to realize is the papacy is the counterfeit Christ on earth, in fulfillment of all of the warnings of Revelation and Daniel. And when you realize that, then you realize that Sunday laws, as a physical expression of that obedience, is connecting you back to the man of sin. It's not about choosing one day over another. It is about choosing one Christ over another. That's what this has always been about. Who do you place your faith and trust and salvation into? If you believe that purgatory and Eucharist, and you need to rest on Sunday because the Pope says so, and all the things that people are going to be doing and frothing at the mouth for, then you are placing your belief and trust in the counterfeit. And you will be made to make a choice. And the people who make the right choice and rebel to this system, I'm not saying like open violent rebellion, I'm just saying do not accept this mark. Do not accept the culture shaping. Do not be part of this system. You'll make the right choice and be on the right side of history. But it's always been about obeying God or the devil. And the thing that people need to understand, it's not a choice between 2 days. That is such a trivial way to look at it. It's not a choice between Saturday and Sunday, folks. It's really not. It's a choice between two beings, Satan or Jesus. The true gospel or the gospel of Babylon. Doing it your own way, tradition, emotions, philosophy, all of the tools of the devil. Or the true gospel, which is grounded in the true mediator. Remember, the true mediator is also the one who died for you. You cannot divorce mediation from death and resurrection. So Jesus paid with blood to be the mediator. He didn't just show up and say, okay, I'm the mediator now. He paid with his dear and precious life to be mediator. The counterfeit mediator has no blood to offer you. He has nothing to offer you. He didn't die for your sins. He didn't resurrect. It's an institution of men that the devil controls. All he has, in order to present himself as the mediator, are clever arguments and subtle philosophies. Again, you're dealing with the father of lies and the most cunning being that God ever created. The devil is not going to give you anything substantial or blood or offering or anything else. He's not capable of generosity. He's the father of lies. So all that he has to offer are lies, philosophy, tradition, this word or that word, subtlety, subversion. This is how the counterfeit mediator justifies his position. The Sabbath is a picture of the gospel, and it foreshadowed Jesus' death and rest in the tomb. The typology in Genesis 1 was fulfilled in the Gospels when Jesus finished his work and rested in the tomb on the Sabbath. Therefore, the Sabbath is intimately tied to blood and life, intimately tied to the true mediator. I hope you see this connection because these things are very profound and nuanced, and I hope that I can convey them appropriately so that you understand them. It's not about 2 days, folks. It's about two Christs. One of them is the real Christ and the other one is the false Christ. Sunday sacredness is a tradition of the Catholic Church. It's not based on blood, but it's based on man's word, which is really Satan's word. The true Sabbath was anchored in a typology that would be fulfilled with Christ's death. On the Sabbath, after Passover, Christ was resting in that tomb, bloodied, beaten, probably looked horrible. That Sabbath is anchored in blood because it's the truth of what actually happened. Sunday is not anchored in anything. The Catholic Church says it's anchored in the resurrection, but it's not anchored in a payment. Sunday is not a picture of the gospel. Sunday is just the first day of the week. And of course, to the pagans, it means a lot of things. But for us who partake in Christ's death, it doesn't mean anything. It's just the first day of the week. If you want to partake in the resurrection, you must partake in Christ's death first. When we repent and we believe the true gospel, we die to our old selves. The second birth also causes the first death, right? The spiritual death, that you die to your old self. You are born again, but you also die to your old self. That's why it's called the first resurrection in Revelation 20. And it's the only place actually that it calls it that. A lot of people think that's a literal resurrection. It's not. The first resurrection is spiritual. It's people coming to life spiritually and dying to their old selves. But in order to do that, you have to die. You have to partake in Christ's death. Satan distracts you with pretty words and philosophy and tradition and emotions about Sunday being based on the resurrection. But those who do not share in Christ's death cannot share in the resurrection. Do you see the connection? When you rest on the Sabbath, on the seventh day, you are aligning with the pattern set by God in the beginning of the universe. And that pattern was to be for all of time that would remind you of Jesus' death, because Jesus' death, he rested on the Sabbath on the seventh day. Therefore, the Sabbath is intimately connected to the gospel and to blood and, dying to your old self and all the things that are associated with the gospel. So when you rest on the seventh day, it is a physical expression of acknowledging the Creator and dying to yourself and finding rest in the true provider and redeemer. If you want to skip that part, which is what the devil does, because he doesn't have a payment to offer you, so he offers you tradition and lofty words and emotion and clever analogies, and gives you, the false light of, oh my gosh, but it's so beautiful, it's this or that. Yes, Jesus resurrected on the first day, but that has nothing to do with the Sabbath. The Sabbath is the Sabbath, and that's always going to be on the seventh day. So Satan distracts you with these clever metaphors, and in the process, people accept that counterfeit, and they do not share in Christ's death because they abandon the true gospel in favor of the counterfeit one. Remember, Satan uses God's goodness and the true things of life to work evil. This is a profound mystery. Just as God uses evil for good, which is a mystery, how God can take evil and point it in a direction to accomplish great good. That is a profound mystery to meditate on. In the same way, there is a profound mystery of how the devil is able to use good things and truth to point that in the direction of evil. And when you realize that that's what the devil does, and that's designed so that it tests the elect and you realize right versus almost right, then you realize what kind of enemy you're really dealing with. That enemy is not obvious, and certainly is never going to be obvious to the majority of the world, despite all of these awakenings and, expositions and so on. That enemy is not going to be obvious. That enemy is the God of this world. It'll be obvious when Jesus returns and destroys that enemy, but until then, it's not going to be obvious. So Satan uses the good things and the true things to point them towards evil. He uses the word of God, which is good, to do great evil, to blaspheme God, to present himself as the counterfeit savior. I mean, it's profound that can be. That is a profound thing to meditate on. Because if that's the case, we need massive discernment. We need to test all things really, really thoroughly. Sunday as a day of rest, as a counterfeit Sabbath, is a bloodless counterfeit Sabbath, tied to a bloodless mediator anchored in lies and deception. I'll say it again, you can go to church on any day of the week. There's no prescription on what day you need to go to church on. People got together every day in the book of Acts. But Sunday as the day of rest, Sunday sacredness, transferring the solemnity of the Sabbath to the first day of the week, that is a bloodless Sabbath. It is not anchored in reality, because God never set that day as a typological situation for Jesus' death. And it is anchored in tradition, in emotions, in clever philosophy and arguments, in things that don't exist. These are just lies. They're just words, information, hot air. Whereas the real Sabbath is grounded in the truth. I have a whole episode on this, that Jesus died on the sixth day and rested on the tomb in the seventh day. That actually happened. That is a physical reality. Therefore, when you rest on the Sabbath, you are aligning to the true gospel, because it is an expression of the gospel. You don't have to keep the Sabbath to be saved, but if you are saved, it is an expression of your faith, because God gives you the power and convicts your conscience to experience his rest in a physical way. Very, very important. The seventh day is anchored in Jesus' death, and it's the truth, and it's also anchored in the life of Christ. He was there in the tomb, resting. Therefore, those who reject it in the coming system, where the beast is going to flex its power and obedience and force people into a choice, force you to reject God or to reject the devil, one of the two. Those who reject it will be destroyed, because you're rejecting the gospel and you're rejecting the Creator. You're rejecting the true Christ in favor of the false one. So we need to expand our understanding of the mark, because it's not just Sunday laws, folks. It's not. It's a spiritual issue, and it comes back to obedience, just like in the beginning. It's always been about obedience. When you obey Jesus, you are conformed to his image. The wicked are going to obey the false Christ and be conformed to his image. Rebellion, blasphemy disguised as light, so on and so forth. Arrogance, pride. At the end, those who take the mark will align with the counterfeit, and they will perish. So learn your history. Learn these very important truths. Learn to articulate them. Learn to be nuanced in your understanding. Don't become dogmatic about Sunday laws, because Sunday laws is not the mark of the beast. The mark is obeying the pontiff, which is going to come back into the world now very shortly as the counterfeit presence of God on earth, and people will marvel after this institution. And when you don't participate in that marveling, whether through your actions or through, your mind, you are going to be cast out of society. You're going to be called a heretic, a Judaizer, a Jew, a Zionist, a legalist, a blasphemer, whatever. Pick your flavor and look in history to find the precedents. That's what it's going to be about. It's going to be about, why aren't you participating in this marveling with us? Why aren't you obeying this authority? Sunday laws are going to be an expression of that, just like the Sabbath is an expression of the gospel, of the plan of salvation. And remember that the Sabbath is also a type that has not yet been fully fulfilled. One of the few. There aren't many, because when Jesus showed up, he fulfilled all the types. But Sabbath and marriage are not fulfilled. Marriage is a picture of Adam and Eve, or Jesus and his bride in eternity. And that obviously is going to be fulfilled when he returns. The Sabbath is also a picture of eternity. It's a placeholder, meaning it has a purpose throughout history to connect you to not just the gospel, so that you die to yourself on that day again. You remember, I remember Jesus' sacrifice. This was such a busy week. I forgot all this stuff. It's time to get back into the gospel. That's what the Sabbath is for. You die to yourself regularly. And you have a whole day to spend with God to marvel at nature, marvel at his works, remember his death on the cross for you, and reconnect. Every week you get to do that. So it's about connecting to the gospel. And of course, that is going to be maximally fulfilled at the very end, when Jesus returns and ushers in eternity. So if the Sabbath is that important of a picture of the gospel, then the people who reject it and align themselves with the counterfeit Christ are going to be destroyed. And again, I don't want to fearmonger you, because the people who are elect will learn the truth, and they will not make that choice. Some of them at the very last minute, like the thief on the cross. We don't know who those people are, but now that you know all these things, it's your responsibility, in my mind, to participate, however great or small, in disseminating this information to other people. I don't mean necessarily share my videos. I mean, take what you've learned here and do something with it. Do something with it in your own circle and see where that takes you. Great or small, doesn't matter. Participate in God's plan to draw his people away and out of this system and away from the false Christ and into the true Christ, because it's quite a time to be alive. Now, onward to the next section, Dominum Deum Nostrum Papam.